I am Melody, 33 years old, and until last Tuesday, I thought my biggest challenge was managing my massive private equity firm in secret. I had no idea my husband was plotting to throw me out on the street. It started when I came home from a supposedly boring audit trip. I walked into my dining room and found all my suitcases packed by the door. Right in the middle of the dining table, pressed under a set of keys, was a note from my husband. "I cannot stand you. The house is sold. Pack up and get out." I stood still for exactly 5 seconds. Then I pulled a pen from my purse, flipped the note over, wrote exactly 4 words, and handed it back to him when he barged through the front door. When he read them, he laughed. But then his phone buzzed with an alert that would ruin his entire life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who thought they could destroy you. I had just stepped off a flight from New York, having wrapped up a grueling but highly lucrative acquisition deal for Apex Holdings. That is the private equity firm I built from the ground up and solely own, a fact my husband Gavin and his relentlessly status-obsessed family knew absolutely nothing about. To them, I was just Melody, the boring freelance financial auditor who brought home a modest paycheck and lacked the pedigree required to sit at their country club tables. I preferred it that way. It kept my assets safe and my mind sharp. The moment I turned the key in the lock of our 4-bedroom suburban home, I sensed something was wrong. The entryway, usually pristine, was cluttered with cardboard boxes and heavy black trash bags. My designer luggage, which I had carefully stored in the attic, was sitting by the front door, hastily stuffed with my clothes. A sleeve of my favorite silk blouse was caught in a zipper dragged across the floor. I dropped my briefcase and walked into the dining room. There, sitting dead center on the custom oak table I had purchased, was a piece of heavy cream cardstock. It was written in Gavin's arrogant, sprawling handwriting. "I cannot stand you. The house is sold. Pack up and get out." I did not gasp. I did not fall to my knees in tears. In my line of work, panic is a liability. I simply stared at the ink, processing the sheer audacity of a man who was drowning in secret debt, thinking he could evict me from my own life. Before I could even set down my coat, the front door burst open behind me. Heavy boots slammed against the entryway tile. I turned to see Gavin strutting into the house, flanked by his mother Beatrice and his sister Caroline. Right behind them were 2 burly men wearing matching moving company uniforms. Gavin stood with his chest puffed out, wearing a tailored suit he could not afford, looking at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. Beatrice pushed past him, her eyes scanning the boxes with visible delight. She pointed a manicured finger at the nearest mover. "Watch your step with those boots," Beatrice snapped, adjusting her silk scarf. "Be careful not to let her cheap thrift store clothes scuff my son's imported hardwood. We need this place pristine for the new owners." I crossed my arms, leaning against the dining table. "My son's hardwood?" I asked quietly. "I am fairly certain my name is on the mortgage, Beatrice." Caroline laughed, a harsh grating sound as she examined her perfectly painted nails. "Not anymore, sweetheart," she sneered. "Gavin finally found a buyer willing to pay $1.2 million for this place. He is taking his cut and moving on to someone who actually fits into our social circle. You have exactly 2 hours to get the rest of your discount rack wardrobe out of here before the new owners arrive to take possession." Gavin stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. He was a broker who traded heavily on his family name, though anyone who actually looked at his books would see he was practically insolvent. "I told you I was done playing house with a boring accountant," Gavin said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The closing documents were finalized this morning. The funds are already clearing into my personal account. It is over, Melody. Take your garbage and leave before I have these gentlemen throw it out on the lawn." Beatrice clapped her hands together, practically vibrating with glee. "We always knew you were a mistake," she added venomously. "You never belonged in our world. You come from nothing, you have nothing, and now you are leaving with nothing. I am just thrilled my boy finally woke up and realized he deserves a woman with actual class and standing." I looked at the three of them. A trinity of narcissism, greed, and staggering stupidity. Gavin really thought he had pulled off the perfect crime. He thought he could secretly sell the marital home forge whatever documents he needed to bypass me, pocket the cash, and leave me destitute. He had relied on his assumption that I was a meek, clueless auditor who would just accept defeat and walk away crying. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my favorite fountain pen. I picked up the cruel note Gavin had left on the table. The air in the room grew thick as they watched me. I flipped the heavy cardstock over to the blank side. "What are you doing?" Gavin demanded, taking a step toward me. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Pack your bags." I ignored him. I placed the pen against the paper and wrote exactly 4 words in bold, deliberate capital letters. I capped the pen, slid it back into my purse, and held the note out toward him. Gavin snatched it from my hand, his face twisting into an ugly scowl. He read the words aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. "I am the buyer." He threw his head back and laughed. Caroline joined in, clutching her stomach. Beatrice just rolled her eyes, sighing heavily. "You are the buyer," Gavin choked out between laughs. "You, a freelance number cruncher who clips grocery coupons. Do you have any idea how pathetic you sound right now? I just sold this property to Zenith LLC, a major investment firm. They wired $1.2 million in cash this morning. You do not even have $1,200 in your checking account." I stood perfectly still, letting his laughter echo off the dining room walls. I did not blink. I just stared at him with a cold, deadpan expression until his laughter began to falter. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating as the realization that I was not breaking down finally started to unnerve him. Then, sharp and loud in the quiet room, Gavin's smartphone chimed. It was a high-pitched, urgent notification tone. He pulled the phone from his jacket pocket, annoyed by the interruption, and glanced at the screen. I watched the color drain completely from his face. His arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His hands began to shake so violently he almost dropped the device. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, stepping closer to look over his shoulder. "Gavin, what is wrong?" He could not speak. He just stared at the notification from his banking app. The screen glowed brightly, displaying an automated fraud alert from federal regulators. The $1.2 million wire transfer from Zenith LLC had not cleared. Instead, his entire bank account had been locked. The bold red text across his screen read, "Account frozen. Suspected wire fraud." He looked up at me, his breathing suddenly shallow and ragged. "What did you do?" he whispered, the false bravado completely gone. Gavin tapped his phone screen with frantic, trembling fingers. He forced the banking app to refresh, swiping down again and again, but the glaring red banner remained. "Account frozen. Suspected wire fraud." The silence in the dining room was shattered by his sudden, ragged breathing. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and rage. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "What exactly did you do to my account?" Beatrice snatched the phone from his hand. She stared at the screen, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking together. "This is a mistake," she declared, waving her hand dismissively. "The bank made an error. Call your wealth manager right now, Gavin. Tell them to fix this immediately." "It is not a mistake," I said, my voice perfectly level. "The bank flagged the transfer because the buyer flagged the transfer." Caroline scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "The buyer. You literally just tried to tell us you are the buyer. You are delusional, Melody. You do not have that kind of money. You have never had that kind of money. You are just a glorified calculator who married into a family that actually matters." Before I could respond, the front door swung open again. The sharp clack of designer stilettos echoed against the imported hardwood. Brianna marched into the hallway, holding a leather clipboard against her chest. She wore a tailored crimson dress that screamed aggressive real estate agent, and a smug, victorious smile that vanished the second she saw me standing in the dining room. "Gavin, why is she still here?" Brianna snapped, not even bothering to lower her voice. "I told you I needed the property completely empty by 3 o'clock. The new owners are sending their representative for the final walkthrough." I looked Brianna up and down. She was the woman Gavin had been sleeping with for the past 6 months, the woman who had conveniently listed our marital home for sale while I was away on a month-long audit in Chicago. She thought she was brilliant. She thought she had executed the perfect stealth transaction. Brianna turned her glare on me. Listen to me very carefully, Melody. The house is sold. The deed has been transferred. You no longer have any legal right to be inside this building. You are trespassing on private property owned by Zenith LLC. If you do not pick up your cheap bags and walk out that door in the next 60 seconds, I am dialing 911 and having you removed in handcuffs. I did not move toward my bags. Instead, I unlatched the brass lock on my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a crisp, embossed stack of papers. I walked slowly around the dining table and stopped right in front of Brianna. I held the papers out to her. Since you are the listing agent, Brianna, I suggest you read the first page, I said, specifically the section detailing the articles of organization for Zenith LLC. Brianna snatched the papers from my hand, her perfectly arched eyebrows pulling together in annoyance. She flipped to the first page. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, moving quickly until they stopped dead at the bottom of the sheet. Her mouth opened slightly. The color drained from her face, matching Gavin's panicked pallor. Read the name of the managing member, I instructed her. Read it out loud for my husband and his mother. Brianna swallowed hard. Her hands began to shake, rustling the thick paper. Zenith LLC. She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Managing member Melody. Gavin stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the dining table. No, he gasped. No, that is impossible. Zenith is a corporate investment firm based out of Delaware. The lawyers vetted it. I vetted it, Gavin, I corrected him. I structured the blind trust. I routed the funds. I submitted the all-cash offer through a proxy the very same week Brianna listed the house behind my back. I bought my own house. But that does not make any sense. Beatrice interjected, her voice rising in shrill confusion. If you bought the house, why is Gavin's money frozen? I turned my gaze to my mother-in-law. Because, Beatrice, we live in a state with strict marital property laws. You cannot sell a marital home regardless of whose name is on the deed without a signed spousal waiver. It is a legal document where one spouse explicitly surrenders their rights to the property proceeds. Gavin's chest was heaving. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows. I submitted the waiver, he said defensively. The title company cleared it. Everything was approved. I took a step closer to him, my voice dropping to a sharp, clinical tone. You submitted a forged waiver, Gavin. You copied my signature from an old tax return, slapped it on a legal document, and handed it to a notary Brianna conveniently provided. You thought you were selling the house to a faceless corporation that would never look twice at the paperwork. You were wrong. You sold it to me. And the moment the wire transfer hit your account, I contacted the bank and the federal authorities with proof of the forgery. The reality of the situation crashed down on the room. Brianna dropped the clipboard. Caroline covered her mouth in shock. You did not just try to steal my home, I continued, addressing Gavin and Brianna directly. By pushing a forged document through a federally insured bank to initiate a $1.2 million wire transfer, you committed federal wire fraud. Both of you. The money is frozen because it is now evidence in a federal investigation. Gavin let out a strangled sound, grabbing his hair. He was facing a massive prison sentence, and he knew it. He looked at Brianna, his eyes wide with desperate accusation, but Brianna was already backing toward the front door, trying to distance herself from the radioactive mess she had helped create. Beatrice, however, did not retreat. Her elitist pride shattered, replaced by a vicious, unrestrained fury. Her precious son, the golden boy she had relentlessly protected, was being dismantled by a woman she viewed as completely beneath her. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You vindictive, manipulative little trash, Beatrice shrieked. She lunged across the dining room, her arm pulling back to strike me directly across the face. I braced myself, refusing to flinch or step away, but the strike never landed. A strong hand shot out from the entryway, clamping down around Beatrice's wrist in midair with absolute authority. Beatrice gasped, struggling against the iron grip, and spun around. Standing there, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, was DeAndre, Caroline's husband. He did not let go of Beatrice's wrist immediately. Instead, he pushed her arm down with a slow, deliberate force that demanded total silence in the room. In his other hand, he held a thick, heavily tabbed legal dossier. He stepped firmly between Beatrice and me, his expression cold and calculating, shifting the entire power dynamic of the room in a single second. DeAndre let her arm drop. He did not shove her. He simply released her wrist with a look of utter disgust, as if he had just touched something foul. The heavy silence in the dining room was deafening. Beatrice stood frozen, rubbing her wrist, her perfectly powdered face twisting into a mask of outrage. "Have you lost your mind?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You do not ever put your hands on me. Caroline, control your husband." Caroline marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the wood floor. She grabbed DeAndre by the elbow, trying to yank him backward. "What are you doing?" Caroline demanded, her face flushed with entitled fury. "We are your family. You are supposed to be on our side. Why are you defending this manipulative little thief?" DeAndre calmly unpried Caroline's fingers from his suit jacket. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His quiet authority commanded the entire room. "I am not here as your husband, Caroline," DeAndre said, his tone clinical and detached. "And I am certainly not here as part of this family. I am here in my capacity as an officer of the court and as corporate counsel. And right now, I am the only thing standing between all of you and a federal indictment." Gavin let out a panicked, breathless sound. He backed up until he hit the wall, his eyes darting frantically between DeAndre and me. Beatrice scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "Indictment." Beatrice spat the word out like poison. "Do not try to use your fancy law vocabulary to intimidate me, DeAndre. We have done nothing wrong. Gavin simply sold his own house to get away from a woman who refuses to support his ambitions." DeAndre opened the thick leather dossier he was holding. He pulled out a stack of bank statements and laid them flat on the dining table right next to Gavin's cruel eviction note. He tapped a manicured finger against a specific line of highlighted numbers. "You might want to take a closer look at these routing numbers," Beatrice DeAndre said, "because they belong to your private retirement accounts." Beatrice's haughty posture faltered. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes narrowing at the papers. "What are those?" she asked, her voice losing a fraction of its arrogant edge. "That is the $300,000 wire transfer you authorized 48 hours ago," DeAndre explained. "The bridge loan you secretly gave Gavin to cover the escrow shortage on this fraudulent real estate transaction. You thought you were helping your golden boy secure his future. But since Gavin forged Melody's signature to push the sale through, the entire transaction is invalid." I watched Beatrice's face drain of color. For years, she had bragged at her elite charity luncheons about her independent wealth, loudly crediting her own financial genius while mocking my modest background. She had always used her money to bail Gavin out of his disastrous flashy investments, claiming she had to step in because his wife was too stingy to fund his brilliance. Now that same arrogance had trapped her, because Melody flagged the final transfer as suspected wire fraud. DeAndre continued, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "The federal authorities have frozen the destination account. That includes Gavin's cut of the house sale and your $300,000. Your money is currently locked in federal escrow." Beatrice swayed on her feet. She grabbed the edge of the dining table to steady herself. "You have to get it back," she gasped, staring at her son. "Gavin, tell the bank to return my money. It is my pension. It is everything I have left from your father's original trust. I cannot." Gavin choked out, tears of genuine terror welling in his eyes. "The account is locked. I cannot even log in." DeAndre closed the dossier with a sharp final snap. "And it gets worse, Beatrice. If the federal regulators pursue wire fraud and forgery charges against Gavin, any funds commingled in that fraudulent transaction are subject to civil asset forfeiture. You funded a federal crime. You will not just lose your pension, you will likely face investigation as a co-conspirator. You are completely broke." "No!" Beatrice screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure devastation. She collapsed into one of the dining chairs, burying her face in her hands, her designer purse sliding off her shoulder and hitting the floor. Caroline turned on DeAndre, her eyes wild with rage. "Fix this!" she commanded, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You are a senior partner at a corporate firm. You make a few phone calls, you threaten whoever you need to threaten, and you fix this right now. We welcomed you into this family. You owe us. DeAndre looked down at his wife. The exhaustion of a decade spent dealing with her vanity and entitlement was written clearly across his face. I owe you nothing, Caroline DeAndre said coldly. I earned my degrees. I pay the mortgage on the house you treat like a hotel. I pay off the credit cards you max out every month trying to look rich for your friends. And I am doing exactly what a father should do right now. I am severing ties to protect my 2 children from being dragged down by a family of felons. Caroline froze, her jaw dropping open. Severing ties. What are you talking about? I filed the paperwork this morning to transfer the kids' college funds into a secure locked trust that requires my sole authorization, DeAndre told her. Because I knew the moment Gavin's scheme blew up, you would try to steal our children's money to bail out your brother. I am filing for divorce, Caroline. I will not let you or your mother bankrupt my kids to save a criminal. The room descended into absolute chaos. Caroline began screaming hysterically, pounding her fists against DeAndre's chest, while he stood there like a stone wall. Beatrice was sobbing loudly at the table, mourning the sudden violent death of her country club lifestyle. Gavin was hyperventilating against the wall, clutching his frozen phone like a lifeline. I stood quietly watching the empire they had built on arrogance and lies burn to ash in my dining room. Then a shrill, desperate voice pierced through the screaming. Stop it! Everyone just stop it right now! We all turned toward the entryway. Brianna, the real estate agent who had facilitated this entire disaster, stepped into the center of the room. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving as she realized the financial safety net she thought she had secured with Gavin was completely gone. She looked around at the ruined family, then locked her desperate eyes on me. She placed both hands protectively over her flat stomach and lifted her chin in a defiant theatrical gesture. You cannot send him to prison, Melody, Brianna cried out, her voice echoing with manufactured panic. You have to drop the fraud charges. You have to leave him alone. I am pregnant with Gavin's baby, and I will not let you ruin the father of my child. The word hung in the air like thick smoke. Pregnant. Brianna stood in the center of the ruined dining room with both hands draped protectively over her flat stomach. She lifted her chin, weaponizing the unborn child to deflect from the fact that she had just participated in a massive federal crime. She expected the announcement to be a shield. She expected it to force me into submission. Instead of shock, the atmosphere in the room violently shifted gears. Beatrice, who just seconds ago was hyperventilating over her frozen retirement funds, suddenly snapped her head up. The tears instantly dried on her powdered cheeks. A cruel, triumphant gleam replaced her sheer panic. It was astonishing how quickly she could pivot from a terrified co-conspirator to a vicious elitist. Caroline mirrored her mother perfectly. She uncrossed her arms and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh of relief, glaring at me with renewed arrogance. In their twisted minds, a pregnancy magically erased forged signatures, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Beatrice pushed herself up from the dining chair and aggressively smoothed her designer skirt. She walked over to Gavin and placed a dramatic, comforting hand on his shoulder. Gavin still looked incredibly nauseous about his locked bank account and the looming threat of prison, but his mother ignored his terror. She looked at me with a level of absolute disgust that she usually reserved for dirt on her shoes. Well, that explains everything, Beatrice declared, her voice dripping with venom. Gavin had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. A man needs a real woman to build a future with. At least Brianna can actually give him an heir, unlike your barren self. The words were designed to gut me. They were designed to tear open the most painful chapter of my life. 2 years ago, I went through 3 agonizing, exhausting rounds of in vitro fertilization. I pumped my body full of hormones, endured endless injections, and suffered through the quiet, crushing devastation of back-to-back miscarriages. During that entire nightmare, my husband's family offered zero support. Caroline scoffed loudly, taking a step toward me to ensure her words hit their mark. Do you have any idea how much money my brother wasted on your useless medical treatments? Caroline sneered. You drained his accounts trying to fix a broken machine. And then you had the nerve to ruin our family Thanksgiving because you were too depressed to cook after your second failure. You are defective, Melody. Gavin deserves a woman who works, a woman who can actually carry on the family name. You should be apologizing to him for holding him back. Gavin stood a little taller. The coward was actually using his mistress's pregnancy to justify stealing my home and attempting to leave me destitute. He puffed his chest out, trying to reclaim some fraction of his shattered authority. "You hear that melody?" Gavin said, his voice laced with false bravado. "I am going to be a father. I have to provide for my true family now. That is why I sold the house. You forced my hand because you could not do the one simple thing a wife is supposed to do. So back off, drop the fraud nonsense, and let us walk away." I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. I looked at Beatrice bathing in her own elitist cruelty. I looked at Caroline desperate to stay relevant. I looked at Brianna standing there like a smug, victorious martyr. And finally, I looked at Gavin, the man who had held my hand while I cried over negative pregnancy tests, knowing all along what he had done. I turned my back on them and walked calmly to my open leather briefcase still resting on the dining table. "As a financial auditor, I investigate discrepancies," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat and clinical. "I track missing assets, I find hidden liabilities, and I follow the money trail no matter how deeply it is buried. And Gavin, you have always been incredibly sloppy with your money." I reached into the front pocket of the briefcase and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It was not a thick legal dossier. It was just a standard itemized billing statement. I smoothed the crease and turned around to face the room. I looked directly at Brianna. The smug smile was practically cemented onto her face. "How far along are you, Brianna?" I asked, my voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. Brianna shifted her weight, clearly enjoying the spotlight. 12 weeks, she declared proudly. 12 weeks, and Gavin has been at every single ultrasound. We are already picking out names. I nodded slowly, letting her cement the timeline into the record. Then I walked over to DeAndre. He was still standing like a stone pillar, watching the chaos with the analytical gaze of a seasoned attorney. I handed the single sheet of paper to him. I knew he would read it objectively without the emotional hysteria that infected his wife and mother-in-law. DeAndre adjusted his suit jacket and took the paper. His eyes scanned the document. I watched his brow furrow. Then his eyes widened slightly. He looked up from the paper and stared at Gavin with a mixture of profound pity and absolute undeniable disgust. 3 years ago, right around the time Gavin and I were spending thousands of dollars on fertility specialists, I explained to the silent room, Gavin opened a secret high-limit credit card under my name. He routed the digital statements to a hidden email address. I only discovered it when I began auditing our marital assets for the divorce I was already planning. I reviewed every single charge. Beatrice rolled her eyes. "We do not care about your petty credit card dispute," she snapped. "You will care about this one, Beatrice," I replied. I pointed to the paper in DeAndre's hand. "That invoice is from a private, highly exclusive urology clinic in a neighboring state. A clinic Gavin visited 3 years ago, paying entirely out of pocket, using that hidden credit card to keep it off our primary insurance." Gavin's face suddenly dropped. The false bravado vanished entirely, replaced by a pale, sickly dread. "DeAndre," I said softly, "read the service description on that invoice out loud for the family." DeAndre looked at his brother-in-law, his expression completely devoid of mercy. He cleared his throat and read the bold black text at the bottom of the page. "The billing code is for a bilateral vasectomy," DeAndre stated, his voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "It is marked as an elective, irreversible procedure, dated exactly 36 months ago." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a massive explosion. I looked at Gavin, whose face had just turned the color of wet ash. He was physically trembling, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. I looked at Beatrice, whose mouth was hanging open, her cruel insult about my fertility dying in her throat. Then I looked at Brianna. Her hands had dropped away from her stomach. The smug, victorious smile had been completely wiped away, leaving behind a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked at Gavin, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to call it a lie. Gavin said nothing. He could not even look her in the eye. I stepped forward, breaking the silence with the undeniable, devastating truth. You might be 12 weeks pregnant, Brianna, I said coldly. But that baby is not his. Gavin stared at Brianna. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color that had rushed out of his face suddenly came roaring back in a violent mottled red. He dropped his frozen phone onto the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter, the screen cracking upon impact. Who is it? Gavin roared, his voice cracking with a terrifying rage. Who is the father, Brianna? You told me it was mine. You looked me in the eyes and told me we were starting a family. Brianna took a step back, her hands dropping from her stomach. The smugness was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered, feral panic. Gavin, wait. I can explain. The doctors must be wrong. The invoice is fake. Melody is lying to tear us apart. It is a certified medical record from an out-of-network urologist, DeAndre stated, flatly tapping the paper with his index finger. It includes his blood work, his signature on the consent forms, and the post-operative follow-up notes. It is ironclad. He cannot have children. Gavin lunged forward, grabbing Brianna by the shoulders of her tailored crimson dress. You lying parasite, he screamed, shaking her. You thought you could trap me. You thought you could use some random bastard child to lock down a ring and a piece of my family's money. Brianna violently shoved him away, her own temper exploding. The polished real estate professional vanished, revealing the ruthless opportunist underneath. Your money! Brianna shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. What money, Gavin? You are drowning in debt. Your credit cards are maxed out. Your car is leased and your country club membership is 3 months past due. You had to beg your mommy to illegally wire you $300,000 just to close this deal. You are a broke, pathetic loser. I thought selling this house would finally get me a decent payout, but you cannot even commit real estate fraud correctly. I wasted 6 months of my life on a fraud. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She watched the woman she had just praised as the mother of her future heir openly admit to using her golden boy for cash. Caroline stood entirely speechless, her jaw slack as the perfect, untouchable image of her brother shattered into pieces on the dining room floor. Gavin and Brianna tore into each other. The living room devolved into a vicious, ear-splitting screaming match. They hurled insults, exposed each other's deepest financial secrets, and screamed about broken promises, fake luxury, and wasted time. The volume was deafening. I did not intervene. I did not flinch. Their screaming was nothing but white noise to me. I reached into my purse, pulled out my smartphone, and unlocked the screen. I navigated to my contacts, pressed a pre-saved number, and tapped the speakerphone icon. I turned the volume all the way up and set the phone down directly in the center of the oak dining table. The phone rang twice. A stern, authoritative voice answered. State Real Estate Commission Ethics and Fraud Division. Director Miller speaking. The official sound of the greeting cut through the room, but Gavin and Brianna were too consumed by their toxic screaming to notice. Director Miller, this is Melody, I said, leaning over the table, speaking clearly and deliberately. I am calling to formally execute the complaint we discussed regarding a licensed broker operating in your jurisdiction. Go ahead, Melody, Director Miller replied, his voice projecting loudly through the speaker. I have your file open on my desk. I am officially reporting broker Brianna Vance, I stated, pronouncing every syllable perfectly. License number 48209. I am reporting her for facilitating the fraudulent sale of a marital asset without proper spousal consent, knowingly accepting a forged spousal waiver, and conspiring to bypass mandatory escrow protocols to route federal funds directly into a personal account. The screaming match abruptly stopped. Brianna whipped her head around her eyes, locking onto the glowing screen of my phone sitting on the table. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute, save for the hum of the speakerphone. I uploaded the digital evidence to your secure portal 2 hours ago. I continued, smoothly ignoring Brianna's horrified stare. The file includes the forged deed, the illegal routing numbers, and time-stamped communications between the broker and the seller, detailing the intent to defraud. We have received and reviewed the entire file, Director Miller confirmed. His tone was uncompromising. The evidence is substantial and undeniable. Given the severity of the infractions and the involvement of a federally insured bank, This goes far beyond a standard ethics violation. Brianna scrambled forward, her high heels slipping on the floor. Wait! She screamed at the phone, lunging toward the table. Director Miller, please, this is a massive misunderstanding. I was misled by the seller. He lied to me. I did not know the signature was forged. Broker Vance Director Miller said, his voice cold and devoid of sympathy. As of this exact moment, your real estate license is under emergency suspension. You are legally barred from conducting any transactions representing any clients or accessing the multiple listing service. A formal investigation has been launched, and we have already forwarded your file to the State Attorney General for criminal review. Brianna let out a choked, desperate sob. She grabbed the edge of the table, leaning heavily against it. Her entire career, her hard-earned reputation, and her livelihood were erased in less than 60 seconds. She had traded her future for a fraudulent payout that never came, and now she was facing a permanent industry ban and potential prison time. Thank you, Director Miller, I said calmly. I will be available for a formal deposition whenever you require. I tapped the red button, ending the call. The silence returned heavier and more suffocating than before. Brianna stared at the black screen of the phone, completely broken. She slowly turned and stumbled toward the front door, pushing it open and running out to the driveway without looking back. Gavin watched her go, his chest rising and falling in erratic, shallow breaths. He was stripped of everything. His mistress had abandoned him. His illicit payout was locked in a federal vault. His mother's pension was gone. He looked around the room, his eyes wild and desperate, like a trapped animal calculating its final move. He turned to DeAndre, Caroline, and Beatrice. Get out! Gavin croaked, his voice raw. No one moved. I said get out! Gavin roared, slamming his fist against the wall. All of you leave. I need to talk to my wife. We are still married. We can fix this. Melody, please, we can figure this out. Just give us 5 minutes alone. Get out of my house. Before anyone could take a single step toward the door, the heavy brass handle turned with a loud, echoing click. The heavy oak door pushed open, swinging wide to reveal the darkening evening sky. Standing on the threshold was William, Gavin's father. William did not carry the frantic, arrogant energy of his wife or daughter. He radiated a cold, terrifying authority. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, leaning slightly on a silver-tipped walking cane. But he was not alone. Flanking him on either side were 2 massive, aggressive private security guards, wearing tactical gear and stone-cold expressions. They stepped into the entryway, their sheer size blocking any possible exit. William scanned the ruined dining room, his piercing gaze landing on his trembling son, his weeping wife, and finally on me. William stood on the threshold, radiating a frigid, absolute authority that immediately sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. He leaned his weight onto his silver-tipped cane, his eyes sweeping over the pathetic scene before him. He looked at the shattered remains of Gavin's phone on the floor, the tear-streaked ruin of his wife's face, and finally at his son, who was trembling against the wall like a cornered rat. Get them out, William commanded. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the room with razor-sharp precision. The 2 private security guards immediately stepped forward. One grabbed Gavin by the bicep, completely ignoring his panicked, sputtering protests. The other moved toward Beatrice and Caroline, his sheer physical size forcing them to back away from the dining table. William, do something! Beatrice shrieked, struggling against the guard's firm, unyielding hand. She has frozen my accounts. This psychotic woman is destroying us. You destroyed yourself the moment you engaged in amateur wire fraud, Beatrice, William replied coldly, not even bothering to look at her. Take them to the cars. I will deal with my son's staggering incompetence later. Leave me with Melody. Caroline tried to dig her heels into the hardwood floor, shooting a venomous glare back at the room. But the guards were entirely unresponsive to her tantrums. Within 30 seconds, the screaming, the crying, and the thrashing faded into the driveway. The heavy oak front door clicked shut, leaving the house in a sudden, suffocating silence. The transition from utter chaos to absolute stillness was jarring. William did not look at me immediately. He walked slowly toward the custom wet bar Gavin had installed in the corner of the dining room, He reached for a bottle of expensive bourbon, pouring 2 fingers of the amber liquid into a heavy crystal tumbler. The ice clinked loudly in the quiet house. He took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the burn, then finally turned to face me. He walked to the dining table and sat in the chair directly opposite mine, placing his glass down with a heavy thud. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a slender, leather-bound checkbook. He clicked open a silver fountain pen, resting his hands on the polished wood. "You have made your point, Melody," William said, his tone dripping with a bored, practiced condescension. "You caught Gavin acting like an impulsive idiot. You caught Beatrice acting like a greedy fool. You proved you are slightly more than the invisible little number cruncher we all assumed you were." He began to write on the check. The scratch of the pen was loud and deliberate, filling the silence of the room. "But let us not confuse a lucky break with actual power," he continued without looking up from the paper. "You stumbled onto a sloppy real estate transaction. You played your hand well, I will give you that. But this family has a reputation to uphold. I have built an empire in this city, and I will not allow decades of my hard work to be tarnished by a public fraud trial simply because my son could not keep his zipper closed or his ledger balanced." William tore the check from the book. He placed his finger on it and slid it across the smooth oak table until it stopped right in front of my hands. $500,000, William stated, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Consider it a highly generous severance package. You will take this check. You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding Gavin Beatrice and this entire humiliating spectacle. You will file for a quiet, uncontested divorce due to irreconcilable differences, and you will immediately drop these absurd federal wire fraud allegations." He leaned back in his chair, swirling the bourbon in his glass, looking at me with a mixture of pity and predatory triumph. "Take the money, Melody," he advised, offering a thin, chilling smile. "It is more cash than a freelance auditor will see in a lifetime. Go buy yourself a nice little condo somewhere far away and leave the high-stakes games to the people who actually know how to play them." I looked down at the check. The blue ink was still fresh, spelling out the massive sum. $500,000 to pack up my pride and slink away into the shadows. $500,000 to let men like Gavin and William continue operating under the delusion that the rules did not apply to them. I reached out and picked up the check by the very edge. William's smile widened. He thought he had won. He thought every person in the world had a price tag, and he was entirely confident he had just accurately guessed mine. He lifted his crystal glass, ready to take a celebratory sip. I held his gaze. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of intimidation. Slowly, deliberately, I ripped the check straight down the middle. William's smile vanished. His glass halted halfway to his mouth. I placed the two halves together and tore them again. I kept dead, unwavering eye contact with the patriarch of the family as I shredded his massive bribe into tiny, useless fragments of paper. When the pieces were small enough, I reached across the table, opened my hand, and let the paper confetti flutter down directly into his crystal glass. The ink immediately bled into the expensive bourbon, ruining the drink instantly. "I do not want your money, William," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "And I certainly do not want your advice on high-stakes games." I turned back to my leather briefcase. I bypassed the folders containing Gavin's forged deed and Beatrice's illicit wire transfers. I reached into the very back compartment and pulled out a thick black portfolio stamped with the Zenith LLC logo. I dropped it onto the table with a heavy smack and pushed it directly over his ruined checkbook. "You think Zenith LLC was just a shell company I created to catch Gavin selling my house?" I said, leaning over the table until I was mere inches from his face. "You think my vision stopped at a single $1 million suburban property? You really should have paid more attention to what I actually do for a living when I leave this house." William stared at the black folder. The arrogant certainty that had defined him his entire life finally began to fracture. He reached out with a trembling hand and flipped open the heavy cover. For the last 18 months, I explained, watching his eyes dart frantically across the top document, Zenith LLC has been quietly purchasing the collateralized debt obligations of Apex Real Estate Development. Your firm, William. You have been dangerously overleveraged for years, borrowing heavily against commercial properties that are rapidly bleeding value. Your primary creditors were absolutely thrilled to offload that toxic debt to a private equity buyer for pennies on the dollar. William's breathing grew shallow. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking hollow and ancient. I did not just buy my own house today, I whispered, delivering the final crushing blow. I bought your entire company's debt portfolio. If Gavin goes down for wire fraud, the resulting scandal triggers the strict morality and stability clauses in your commercial leases. Your major tenants will walk. You will default on your loans. And when you default, William, I am the sole entity holding the paper. I own your entire empire. William stared at the black folder, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish trying to draw air. The arrogant certainty that had defined his entire existence was shattering right before my eyes. I did not wait for him to find his voice. I picked up my briefcase, turned my back on the patriarch of the Vance family, and walked out the front door. The cool night air felt incredibly refreshing against my skin. I had burned their private sanctuary to the ground, but the public dismantling of their empire was already scheduled for tomorrow. The Heritage Pines Country Club was the undisputed epicenter of local high society. It was a fortress of old money manicured golf courses and ruthless gossip. By noon the next day, the grand ballroom was filled with 200 of the city's wealthiest and most influential women, all gathered for the annual Children's Foundation luncheon. Beatrice Vance was the chairwoman of the event. She was entirely in her element, standing near a towering swan-shaped ice sculpture in the center of the room. She wore a pristine white Chanel suit, a thick string of South Sea pearls, and a smile so brittle it could cut glass. She was performing. She was desperately overcompensating for the sheer terror I had inflicted on her family just 12 hours prior. I watched her from the shadows of the mezzanine balcony. Beatrice held court with the mayor's wife and several prominent socialites. She laughed loudly, tossing her head back, bragging aggressively about Gavin's upcoming real estate ventures and William's supposedly booming commercial development firm. She was selling them the illusion of the untouchable Vance legacy, terrified that the foundation was already turning to dust beneath her designer heels. Caroline stood nearby, nursing a strong mimosa and looking deeply hungover, her eyes darting nervously around the room, as if waiting for a bomb to drop. At precisely 1 o'clock, the clinking of expensive silverware faded as the foundation's director, an older woman named Margaret, took the stage. She adjusted the microphone, beaming out at the sea of wealthy attendees. "Welcome, ladies," Margaret announced, her voice echoing warmly through the opulent ballroom. "We are here today to celebrate a monumental milestone. For months, our youth outreach program was on the verge of bankruptcy. But yesterday, a single anonymous donor stepped forward and fully funded our entire operating budget for the next 5 years. Today, that remarkable woman has agreed to step out of the shadows and say a few words about the importance of true philanthropy." The room erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause. Beatrice clapped gracefully, a patronizing smile fixed on her face, eager to network with whoever this massive donor turned out to be. She leaned forward, hungry for an introduction to a new source of wealth. "Please welcome our savior," Margaret said, gesturing toward the grand mahogany staircase. "Melody Vance." Beatrice dropped her champagne flute. The heavy crystal shattered violently against the marble floor, splashing expensive alcohol across her pristine white shoes. Caroline choked on her drink, coughing loudly into her linen napkin. I walked down the sweeping staircase. I wore a tailored charcoal gray suit with a razor-sharp cut and a crimson silk blouse. I did not look like a grieving barren wife. I looked like an executioner. The applause continued as I glided past Beatrice. I did not even grant her a glance. Her face had turned the color of wet ash, her eyes wide with a panicked, frantic realization. I stepped onto the stage, accepted the microphone from Margaret, and looked out over the 200 elite guests. "Thank you, Margaret." I began, keeping my voice perfectly steady and clinical. "As a financial auditor, I spend my life examining ledgers. I track missing assets, I investigate fraud, and I look for the truth hidden beneath the numbers. And philanthropy, much like high society, is often a desperate exercise in maintaining optics." The room went entirely silent. The women hung on my every word, sensing the electric tension radiating from the stage. We are surrounded by families who project immense wealth. I continued my gaze, slowly panning the room until it locked directly onto Beatrice. Families who sponsor tables, host lavish luncheons, and wear the finest pearls. But a balance sheet never lies. A balance sheet reveals when an empire is actually just a hollow shell built on toxic debt. It reveals when a supposedly brilliant patriarch has over-leveraged his entire commercial real estate firm, leaving him begging private equity buyers for mercy to avoid a total collapse. A low, sharp murmur rippled through the ballroom. The society women were incredibly perceptive. They knew William Vance was the biggest commercial developer in the room. They immediately began connecting the dots. I saw several women turn their heads to stare directly at Beatrice, whose rigid smile had completely dissolved into a mask of pure horror. "True financial transparency is rare," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the rising whispers. "It is easy to write a charity check when you are simultaneously engaging in federal wire fraud to sell marital assets behind your spouse's back. It is easy to pretend you are a pillar of the community when your son is hiding secret urology bills and mistress pregnancies, but eventually the debts come due, the hidden liabilities are exposed, and those who built their entire lives on fraud and arrogance are left with absolutely nothing." The whispers escalated into a chaotic, buzzing frenzy. The entire room was staring at the Vance women. Caroline was physically shrinking behind a massive floral arrangement, trying to hide her face from the piercing judgment of her peers. Beatrice was vibrating with a mixture of profound humiliation and explosive rage. I had just dissected her entire family's ruin without naming them once, stripping away their social armor and exposing their impending bankruptcy to the very people she desperately needed to impress. "I recommend you all audit your own circles carefully," I concluded, offering a polite, icy smile to the crowd. "Thank you for your time and enjoy your lunch." I handed the microphone back to a stunned Margaret and descended the stage. The applause was scattered and distracted. The guests were far too busy gossiping to clap. I walked straight toward the grand exit, my posture perfect, ignoring the burning glare of my mother-in-law. Beatrice could not handle the public destruction. Her narcissism completely overrode her common sense. She stormed through the crowd, desperate to reassert her dominance, and prove to her staring peers that she was still untouchable royalty. She marched directly up to the main catering station by the exit where the club's general manager, Mr. Sterling, was overseeing the service. "Mr. Sterling?" Beatrice commanded, her voice intentionally loud so the surrounding socialites would hear. "I am settling the entire $40,000 catering invoice for this event right now. I will not have my family's generosity questioned by a bitter, disgruntled former employee." She opened her designer purse, pulled out her heavy black metal credit card, and slapped it onto the silver tray. Mr. Sterling offered a polite bow, though his eyes darted nervously toward the watching crowd. "Of course, Mrs. Vance. Thank you for your continued patronage," he said quietly. He picked up the card and swiped it through the digital terminal. The machine thought for a moment, then emitted a loud, sharp negative beep. The red light flashed brightly. Mr. Sterling frowned. He wiped the magnetic strip on his jacket and swiped it again. Another loud, rejecting beep echoed through the quiet lobby area. Dozens of society women paused, holding their breath, watching the exchange with hungry, predatory interest. "Try it again," Beatrice hissed, her hands trembling as she grabbed the edge of the table. "The machine is obviously malfunctioning. Run it manually." Mr. Sterling typed the numbers directly into the terminal. He looked up at Beatrice, his expression shifting from polite deference to extreme, unavoidable discomfort. He did not lower his voice, and in the cavernous, silent hall, his words carried perfectly. "Mrs. Vance." "I am terribly sorry," Mr. Sterling announced. "The terminal is not malfunctioning. Your bank has issued a hard decline and an immediate confiscation order. The message indicates that this account, along with all of your secondary lines of credit, have been completely frozen by a federal fraud hold. I am afraid I have to keep the card." I did not stay to watch Mr. Sterling physically confiscate Beatrice's metal credit card. The sharp rejecting beep of the terminal and the collective horrified gasp from the surrounding elite were the perfect final notes to the afternoon. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Heritage Pines lobby and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The valet, a young man, who had usually treated me with mild indifference whenever I arrived in Gavin's shadow, practically sprinted to retrieve my vehicle. Before my car even rounded the corner, the frantic, aggressive clack of high heels striking the pavement echoed loudly behind me. Melody, stop right there. Caroline's voice was a shrill, hysterical shriek. Several valets and arriving country club members turned their heads watching as she stormed across the manicured driveway. Caroline's face was blotchy, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as she marched directly into my path, physically blocking me from moving toward the valet stand. She was practically vibrating with rage, her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. "You are a vindictive, psychotic monster," Caroline screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You humiliated my mother in front of the most powerful women in the city. You destroyed our entire family name. You ruined our lives because you are bitter that my brother finally found a real woman." I looked at her, completely unfazed by her tantrum. She was spiraling, lashing out because the illusion she had worshipped her entire life was dissolving right in front of her eyes. "I did not ruin your lives, Caroline," I replied, my voice remaining perfectly flat and clinical. I simply read the ledger out loud. "Your family ruined themselves. I just stopped paying the premium to keep your secrets. You are nothing but a glorified calculator," Caroline sneered, stepping closer, desperately trying to intimidate me. "You got lucky, Melody. That is all this is. You stumbled onto one of Gavin's bad deals and you think you are a mastermind. We will sue you for defamation. My father will drag you through civil court until you are begging us for pocket change." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of any humor. I looked Caroline up and down, taking in her immaculate, expensive appearance. "You are standing here threatening me with legal ruin while wearing a spring collection Chanel jacket you bought on a 20% interest credit card," I said smoothly. "You are holding the key fob to a Porsche Macan that is leased exclusively under your husband's name because your personal credit score is catastrophic. You do not have a fortune, Caroline. You have a costume." Caroline's mouth opened, but no words came out. The precision of the insult hit her directly in the chest. "For 5 years you treated me like a human. ATM?" I continued, taking a slow step toward her, forcing her to back up. "For 5 years you ordered the most expensive bottles of wine at every single family dinner, ate prime steak, and then shoved the leather check folder across the table to me. You looked me in the eye and said freelancers need to learn generosity to attract wealth. You forced me to subsidize your fake luxury lifestyle because you felt entitled to my hard-earned money. You wanted me to be generous. Caroline, I just gave your mother the gift of total financial transparency." Caroline's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. She raised her hand, entirely ready to slap me right there in the country club driveway. Before she could swing, a sleek, dark gray SUV pulled up sharply to the curb, its tires screeching slightly against the pavement. The heavy passenger door pushed open. DeAndre stepped out. He was wearing his dark, immaculately tailored courtroom suit. His posture was rigid and his face was carved out of pure stone. He did not look angry. He looked entirely detached, carrying the terrifying calm of an attorney who had already won his case before stepping into the room. Caroline immediately dropped her raised hand. The rage on her face vanished, replaced instantly by a frantic, desperate relief. She spun around and ran toward her husband, reaching out to grab his arm. "DeAndre, thank God you are here," Caroline cried, her voice pitching up into a pathetic, victimized whine. "Melody has lost her mind. She is inside terrorizing my mother. She is making up insane lies about my father's company. You need to call your partners and file a cease and desist right now. We have to stop her." DeAndre did not reach out to comfort his wife. He did not wrap his arms around her. He stepped back, physically removing himself from her grasp. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. "I am not here to defend you," Caroline, DeAndre stated. His voice was a low, rumbling baritone that carried no warmth whatsoever. "I am here in my official capacity as an officer of the court, and I am formally serving you." He pressed the heavy envelope directly against Caroline's chest, forcing her to take it. She stumbled back, clutching the thick packet of paper against her expensive jacket. "Serve me?" Caroline gasped, her eyes darting frantically between DeAndre and the envelope. "Serve me with what? DeAndre, what is this?" "Those are divorce papers." DeAndre explained, his tone absolutely ruthless. "They are accompanied by an emergency ex parte injunction, granting me full immediate physical and legal custody of our 2 sons. You are legally barred from returning to our primary residence. My assistant has already packed 2 suitcases of your seasonal clothing and left them with the concierge at the downtown Marriott." Caroline began to hyperventilate. She tore at the flap of the envelope, ripping it open and pulling out the dense stack of legal filings. The bold black text at the top of the pages confirmed everything he just said. "You cannot do this," Caroline sobbed, her voice breaking. "We are a family. You cannot take my boys away from me over a fight with my brother. This is illegal." "It is not about Gavin's mistress," DeAndre said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. When Melody produced the invoice for Gavin's secret medical procedure yesterday, it proved that Gavin had been hiding a secret high-limit credit card for years. It made me realize that I am married to a woman who shares the exact same genetics, the exact same entitlement, and the exact same propensity for lying. So last night I went home and I ran a forensic audit on our own household. Caroline froze. The packet of papers slipped slightly in her trembling hands. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like she might pass out on the asphalt. "I audited our joint accounts," DeAndre continued relentlessly. "I audited the business overhead. And finally, I audited the 529 college savings plans I set up for our sons. The accounts that I have been depositing $2,000 into every single month since the day they were born." DeAndre took a step closer, towering over his wife, his eyes blazing with a devastating, uncontainable disgust. "They are empty, Caroline. Both of them. Over $180,000 completely gone. I pulled the digital transfer logs. You drained your own children's future to secretly bail out Gavin's failing real estate schemes. You stole from our sons to protect your brother's fake empire." Caroline opened her mouth to speak, but she had absolutely no defense. DeAndre turned his back on her, walked over to my waiting car and opened the passenger door. I stepped into the passenger seat of DeAndre's SUV, the heavy door thudding shut and instantly severing the sound of Caroline's hysterical sobbing. DeAndre did not look back. He shifted the vehicle into drive and pulled smoothly out of the country club parking lot, leaving his soon-to-be ex-wife stranded on the asphalt, with 2 suitcases of out-of-season clothing and an absolutely decimated future. We drove in total silence. It was not a sad silence. It was the deeply satisfying quiet of a perfectly executed surgical strike. An hour later, I was sitting at the sprawling glass desk in my downtown office. The city lights began to flicker on outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across my paperwork. I opened my laptop and clicked on a secure encrypted application icon. Gavin had been frantic for housing after I formally evicted him from our marital home. He needed a place that looked appropriately expensive to maintain his fragile ego, but he had absolutely zero liquidity. Zenith LLC, my holding company, happened to own a fully furnished high-end loft in the Arts District. I had authorized my property manager to offer Gavin a short-term lease at a suspiciously generous rate. Gavin, arrogant and legally blind, signed the digital contract without reading the 50-page addendum. If he had, he would have noticed the clause explicitly acknowledging the active landlord-monitored security cameras in the main living areas. The live feed popped onto my screen in crystal-clear, high definition. The loft was a disaster. Takeout boxes littered the marble countertops, and Gavin was pacing the length of the living room, chewing nervously on his thumbnail. He looked utterly ragged. His mistress had humiliated him, his mother's credit was frozen, and his real estate license was suspended. Suddenly, the front door of the loft burst open. It slammed against the drywall with a violent crash. Caroline stormed inside. She looked completely unhinged. Her meticulously styled hair was a rat's nest. Her Chanel jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, and her makeup was smeared in thick black tracks down her cheeks. Gavin jumped back startled. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, holding up his hands. "How did you get past the doorman?" Caroline did not answer his question. She crossed the room like a guided missile and shoved her brother hard in the chest. "He took my kids, Gavin!" Caroline screamed, her voice tearing at the edges. "DeAndre took the boys. He took the house. He locked me out of the joint accounts. Because of you. I stole from my own children to cover your pathetic failing margins, and now I have absolutely nothing. Give me my money back. I need a retainer for a defense attorney right now." Gavin shoved her back, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Are you out of your mind?" "I do not have your money, Caroline. It is gone. The commission from the house sale got locked down by the state board. I am facing federal fraud charges. Do you think I am sitting on a pile of cash?" Caroline's wild eyes darted around the messy loft. They landed on a heavy black reinforced laptop sitting open on the coffee table. A thick security key drive was plugged into the side port. Caroline gasped. A desperate, greedy light suddenly illuminated her tear-stained face. "You liar," she breathed, taking a slow step toward the table. "You have the ghost drive." Gavin panicked. He lunged toward the table, trying to block her path. "Do not touch that, Caroline. That is not my money. That belongs to the firm." Dad transferred the last of the liquid assets into offshore crypto accounts before Melody started acquiring our debt. It is the only capital we have left to fight the bankruptcy. I leaned closer to my monitor, turning the volume up. They were handing me the final nail for their coffins on a silver platter. "I do not care about Dad's failing company!" Caroline shrieked, diving for the coffee table. "I am losing my children. Give me the access codes. Transfer my $180,000 back right now." Gavin grabbed her by the shoulders, throwing her backward. She hit the edge of the leather sofa and bounced back up, swinging wildly. The Golden siblings of the Vance family, the heirs to an elite real estate dynasty, were physically brawling like alley cats over a metal laptop. Caroline clawed at Gavin's face, her manicured nails leaving deep red scratches across his cheek. Gavin yelled in pain and grabbed her wrists, wrestling her to the floor. "Stop it!" Gavin roared, pinning her arms down. "You cannot touch those accounts. If anyone moves that Ethereum out of the Cayman servers, it creates a digital footprint. The IRS does not know about the $7 million hidden in that ledger. If you cash out to pay a divorce lawyer, you will trigger an audit, and Dad goes to federal prison for tax evasion." Caroline thrashed underneath him, kicking her legs. "Let him rot," she screamed, completely unburdened by family loyalty now that her own survival was on the line. "I want my money." I had heard enough. I smiled, my fingers flying across my keyboard. I dragged the cursor over the video timeline, highlighting the last 10 minutes of footage. I clipped the file, ensuring the audio of Gavin clearly outlining the $7 million in hidden offshore Ethereum, the Cayman Islands server locations, and his father's deliberate tax evasion was perfectly audible. I attached the video file to a new email. I typed in the address of Special Agent Harris, a senior investigator at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We had built a very mutually beneficial relationship over the years during my various corporate audits. The subject line was simple: urgent evidence of willful tax evasion and hidden offshore assets, William Vance and Apex Development. I hit send. I sat back in my chair and watched the green progress bar shoot across the screen. The message vanished into cyberspace. The speed of the federal government is usually agonizingly slow, but when an anonymous tipster hands them a high-definition confession detailing $7 million in hidden untaxed offshore assets, they move with terrifying velocity. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the financial earth beneath the Vance family cracked wide open. I was sipping a black coffee at my desk when the news alerts began to flood my phone. The IRS, coordinating with international cybercrime divisions, had executed an emergency freeze on the Cayman server wallets. William and Gavin Vance had lost access to their final hidden lifeline. Their secret safety net was entirely vaporized. The federal holds were absolute. Every last cent of their hidden fortune was seized, pending a massive criminal investigation into corporate tax fraud and money laundering. They had zero capital to hire defense attorneys. They had zero leverage to negotiate with their creditors. They were stripped of their homes, their reputations, and their remaining cash. William and Gavin Vance were now officially undeniably penniless. But a cornered animal does not simply surrender. It lashes out blinded by panic and driven by the primal instinct to survive. I knew Gavin better than he knew himself. I knew that once the IRS froze his Cayman wallets, his mind would frantically search for a loophole. He would remember the early days of Zenith LLC, the holding company I created to manage my own assets while I was still trapped in their toxic family web. He would remember that I insisted on keeping physical encrypted hard drive backups of all initial corporate ledgers. In his manic, sleep-deprived state, Gavin would convince himself that my personal hard drive contained a master backdoor key or recovery seeds that could bypass the federal freeze. It was a delusional leap of logic, but desperation breeds delusion. I spent the evening preparing for his arrival. My home office was a sanctuary of minimalist precision located on the ground floor of my property. I placed a heavy silver solid-state drive dead center on my pristine mahogany desk. It looked incredibly important. It was resting right next to my docking station, practically glowing under the ambient moonlight filtering through the plantation shutters. Then I made myself a pot of Earl Grey tea. I turned off every light in the house, pulled my high-backed leather chair into the deep shadows in the corner of the office, and I waited. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 2 in the morning, the heavy wooden gate at the side of my property creaked open. Gavin was not a professional thief. He was a spoiled, arrogant heir who had never faced a locked door he could not buy his way through. Now reduced to common burglary, he was clumsy. I heard his heavy, uneven footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I heard the frantic metallic scraping of a crowbar or a screwdriver wedged against the frame of the French doors leading into my study. He shattered a glass pane near the handle. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the silent house. He reached in, unlocked the door, and stumbled inside, bringing the smell of damp night air and stale sweat with him. Gavin breathed in ragged, shallow gasps. A narrow beam from a tactical flashlight sliced through the darkness, darting erratically across my bookshelves, my filing cabinets, and finally landing on the mahogany desk. The beam steadied on the silver hard drive. I watched his silhouette rush forward. He practically lunged across the room, his hands shaking violently as he snatched the drive from the desk. He clutched it to his chest like a life preserver. "You always were incredibly sloppy, Gavin." My voice cut through the silence, perfectly level and completely devoid of fear. Gavin shrieked, dropping his flashlight. The heavy metal cylinder hit the floor and rolled, casting wild, spinning shadows across the room. He spun around, staring into the dark corner where I sat. I took a slow sip of my tea. The delicate clink of the porcelain teacup settling onto its saucer sounded louder than a gunshot. "Melody." Gavin gasped, his voice trembling with a mixture of absolute terror and lingering arrogance. "You crazy witch! What are you doing sitting in the dark?" "I am watching a thief seal his own fate," I replied smoothly. I remained seated, my posture relaxed, unbothered by the man trespassing in my home. "Did you really think I would leave my security system deactivated by accident? I turned off the perimeter alarms because I wanted you to walk through that door. I wanted to see exactly how pathetic you have become." Gavin backed up, gripping the hard drive tightly. He looked toward the broken French doors, calculating his escape route. He expected me to scream. He expected me to call the police, to panic, to fight him for the silver drive in his hands. When I did absolutely nothing, his old, unearned swagger tried to resurface. "You are bluffing." Gavin sneered, his chest heaving as he pointed a finger in my direction. "You think you are so smart, Melody. You think you took everything from us. But you forgot about the original LLC access protocols. Once I plug this drive into a clean terminal, I will override the federal block on the Cayman servers. I will transfer the $7 million to a ghost account before the IRS even wakes up. You lose." I smiled. The expression was entirely hidden in the shadows, but he could hear the cold amusement in my voice. "You think that drive holds your salvation, Gavin?" I asked quietly. You think a woman who orchestrated the public financial execution of your entire bloodline would simply leave a master key sitting on her desk for you to steal? Gavin hesitated. A flicker of profound doubt crossed his face, but he was too desperate to listen to reason. He had nothing else left. He tightened his grip on the drive, took a step backward, and then turned and bolted. He scrambled through the broken French doors, his shoes tearing up the manicured lawn as he sprinted blindly into the night. I did not chase him. I did not pick up the phone to dial the police. I set my teacup down, stood up, and walked over to my desk. I opened the locked bottom drawer and pulled out my actual laptop. The glowing screen illuminated my face in the dark room. Gavin thought he had stolen the keys to the kingdom. He did not realize he had just stolen a digital landmine. The silver drive was not a backup ledger, it was a weapon. I had programmed the drive with a highly sophisticated military-grade Trojan horse virus. I watched the tracking software boot up on my monitor. A red dot blinked to life on the digital map, moving rapidly down the street as Gavin sped away in his vehicle, likely rushing toward a cheap motel or an internet cafe to access a secure terminal. I tapped my keyboard, arming the payload. The moment Gavin plugged that silver drive into a computer, his illusion of escape would evaporate. The virus was designed to instantly bypass all firewalls and annihilate his operating system. It would systematically hunt down and permanently wipe any hidden cloud backups or encrypted wallets he had stashed away on the device. But the destruction was only the first phase. Simultaneously, the Trojan would execute a silent, invisible script. It would package every single piece of metadata on his machine, every email, every hidden transaction log, and every corrupt contract he had ever signed. It would then ping his exact GPS coordinates and transmit that entire massive incriminating data dump directly to the encrypted servers of the federal agents already hunting him. I watched the red dot on my screen come to a sudden stop on the digital map. 5 seconds later, the status indicator on my dashboard flashed from green to a brilliant flashing red. Payload deployed. Gavin Vance had just handed his exact location and his final confession directly to the authorities. The Starlight Motel sat just off Interstate 95, a decaying relic of the 1980s that smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. It was exactly the kind of place a man like Gavin Vance would usually refuse to even drive past. Tonight, it was his final refuge. He sat on the edge of a sagging, floral-patterned mattress, the stolen silver hard drive plugged directly into a burner laptop he had paid cash for an hour earlier. The screen illuminated his face in a harsh blue light. He was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he waited for the decryption sequence to finish. He just needed the routing numbers. He just needed to bypass the federal block and move the $7 million of hidden Ethereum into a decentralized ghost wallet. Instead of a progress bar, the screen suddenly went entirely black. A single line of neon green text appeared in the center of the monitor. It read, "Payload executed. Transmission complete." Gavin mashed the keyboard, his breathing turning into panicked, ragged gasps. The laptop was completely unresponsive. The military-grade Trojan I had planted on that drive had already bypassed his primitive firewalls, annihilated the operating system, and sent a massive encrypted data dump of his entire illegal financial history directly to the servers of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Included in that data dump was a precise real-time ping of his current GPS coordinates. He did not even have time to unplug the machine. The flimsy motel door did not just open, it exploded inward, ripped entirely off its hinges by a steel battering ram. The cheap wood splintered violently across the stained carpet. Federal agents poured into the small room wearing heavy tactical vests emblazoned with bold yellow letters. There was no polite questioning. There was no deference to his country club pedigree. 2 agents grabbed Gavin by the shoulders of his expensive sweat-stained dress shirt and slammed him face first down onto the cheap mattress. Gavin Vance, an agent, shouted, his voice cutting through the ringing in Gavin's ears. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and fleeing an active federal audit." Gavin screamed, thrashing wildly against the heavy hands pinning him down. Do you know who I am? He roared, his voice cracking with pure hysteria. You cannot do this. Call my father. Call William Vance. The agents ignored his tantrum. They wrenched his arms behind his back, securing his wrists, not with standard metal handcuffs, but with heavy, thick plastic zip ties. They hauled the golden child of the Vance real estate dynasty to his feet, shoved him out the shattered doorway, and marched him across the neon-lit parking lot toward a waiting armored transport vehicle. His neighbors for the evening stood in their doorways filming the entire humiliating spectacle on their smartphones. 30 miles away, my home office was completely silent. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the latest quarterly projections for my holding company when my cell phone vibrated violently against the polished wood. The caller ID flashed in bright red letters, Beatrice Vance. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the rhythmic, desperate buzzing before I calmly picked up the device and pressed accept. I did not say hello. Melody Beatrice shrieked into the receiver. Her voice was unrecognizable. The polished, aristocratic matriarch who had spent the last decade speaking to me like I was the dirt on her designer shoes was completely gone. She sounded like a cornered, panicked animal. They took him. Beatrice sobbed, her breath hitching wildly. They raided a motel and they took my son. The police are refusing to release him. They froze everything, Melody. Our accounts, the firm's operating funds, even my personal checking account. The federal magistrate set his bail at $250,000 cash. She paused, taking a ragged, gulping breath, shifting instantly from panic back to the only language she knew how to speak: absolute entitled demand. You need to wire the funds to the municipal court right now, Beatrice commanded. You are the only one with liquid cash. Call your bank immediately and authorize the release. I leaned back in my leather chair, taking a slow, measured sip of my chamomile tea. I am not authorizing a single cent, Beatrice. I replied, my voice as cold and smooth as a glacier. Gavin is facing a federal indictment. I am not throwing $250,000 into a black hole to buy him a few extra nights of sleep outside a jail cell. There was a stunned, breathless silence on the other end of the line. Beatrice could not comprehend my refusal. Her brain simply rejected the data. Are you out of your mind? Beatrice screamed, the sheer volume of her voice distorting the speaker on my phone. He is your husband. You took a vow. You owe him your support. You owe this family. I set my teacup down. The sharp clink of porcelain echoed softly in my quiet office. I owe him nothing. I stated, my tone dropping to a deadly clinical whisper. And I certainly owe you absolutely nothing. But we are family, she pleaded, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. You cannot leave him in there. Do you remember 3 years ago, Beatrice, I asked, cutting her off entirely? Do you remember the week of Thanksgiving? I had a 104-degree fever. It was a severe strain of the flu, bordering on pneumonia. Gavin was away on one of his famous golf weekends, ignoring my calls. I called you at 9 in the morning, physically unable to stand up without the room spinning, struggling to breathe. I begged you to drive me to the emergency room. Beatrice went dead silent on the line. She remembered. You sighed into the phone. I continued relentlessly. You told me I was being overly dramatic. You told me to take a cold shower and swallow an aspirin because driving me to the hospital would interrupt your scheduled deep tissue massage and seaweed wrap at the club. You left me to drive myself to the emergency room while hallucinating from a fever because my health was an inconvenience to your spa day. You cannot hold the past against us right now, Beatrice cried desperately. This is different. This is life or death. You are right, I agreed coldly. This is different. This is consequence. You do not have a son anymore, Beatrice. You have a federal inmate. I suggest you get used to visiting him behind glass. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ignoring her sudden hysterical screaming, and pressed the red button to end the call. The silence rushed back into my office, clean and perfectly absolute. Less than 10 seconds later, my phone lit up again. The screen glowed brightly in the dark room, displaying a secure encrypted text message from DeAndre. I opened the notification. William is trying to liquidate the family trust to pay the bail. It's illegal. Move now. DeAndre's text message was the starting gun. I did not waste a single second. William Vance thought he could bypass federal law by bullying his board of directors into illegally bleeding the family trust dry to save his son. He still believed he was the untouchable king of his concrete castle. He was about to find out that the boardroom was no longer his domain. I met DeAndre in the underground parking garage of the Apex Development corporate headquarters. The soaring glass and steel tower was the ultimate monument to William's massive ego. DeAndre looked sharper than ever. He had effortlessly traded his role as a suffering Vance son-in-law for a much more lucrative, powerful position as my lead corporate counsel. We walked through the revolving doors and completely ignored the frantic receptionist who tried to flag us down. We stepped into the executive elevator and hit the button for the penthouse. When we pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors of the main boardroom, the air inside was thick with panic. William was standing at the head of the long glass table, his face a dangerous shade of crimson. He was shouting at his 6 board members, slamming his fist down on the polished surface. "Liquidate the secondary holdings right now!" William roared, spittle flying from his lips. "I do not care about the early withdrawal penalties. Gavin needs $250,000 in cash by noon, and we need an immediate slush fund to fight the federal freeze on the corporate accounts. Transfer the assets. That is a direct violation of fiduciary duty and an act of corporate fraud, William." My voice sliced through the chaotic shouting, instantly silencing the entire room. William whipped his head around, his eyes bulging as he saw me standing in the doorway with DeAndre right beside me. The board members, men in $1,000 suits, sweating completely through their collars, stared at us in stunned silence. "How dare you walk into my building?" William snarled, marching around the edge of the table. "Security should have thrown you out on the street." "And you," he pointed a trembling finger at DeAndre. "You betray your own wife and align yourself with this bitter, vindictive little accountant." "I am aligning myself with the new majority shareholder of Apex Development," DeAndre stated smoothly. His voice was a low, rumbling baritone that commanded absolute authority. He unclasped his leather briefcase and tossed a thick stack of bound legal filings onto the center of the glass table. William stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the documents, then back at me, his arrogant sneer faltering for the very first time. "What is he talking about?" William demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I stepped further into the room, taking my rightful place near the head of the table. I looked directly into the eyes of the man who had spent a decade treating me like a disposable accessory. "You leveraged your entire empire to cover Gavin's failing projects," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly level and clinical. "You took out massive amounts of toxic commercial paper, hiding the liability from your own board. I bought that debt for pennies on the dollar through my holding company. Your loan agreements carried a very specific, strict default clause. If the firm engaged in any documented illegal financial activity, the debt could be instantly converted into equity." William let out a harsh, barking laugh, attempting to regain control of the room. "You have no proof of illegal activity. The IRS freeze is a misunderstanding. You have absolutely nothing on me." Actually, DeAndre interjected, picking up the top document. "At 3 o'clock this morning, Gavin Vance plugged a stolen hard drive into a motel computer. That drive contained a tracking virus that intercepted and forwarded your entire hidden internal ledger directly to federal agents. We have a copy of the exact same data dump. You hid $7 million in untaxed offshore cryptocurrency. The default clause has been officially triggered and legally verified by a federal judge." I placed my hands flat on the glass table and leaned forward. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, my debt converted to a 72% controlling stake in this company," I announced, looking at the terrified board members. "William Vance's shares are entirely diluted and practically worthless. I own this company." William's face turned the color of wet ash. He gripped the back of his leather chair, his knuckles turning stark white. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, as the reality of his total financial execution finally sank in. "You are a glorified secretary." William spat, his voice shaking with a potent mixture of rage and profound denial. "You sat at my Thanksgiving table 3 years ago and I told you that women lacked the killer instinct for corporate acquisitions. I told you your only job was to smile and support my son. I built this company with my bare hands. You cannot take it from me. You built a house of cards on fraud and arrogance, I replied coldly, and your outdated ego just cost you your entire legacy. You are officially terminated as Chief Executive Officer of Apex Development effective immediately. I turned my gaze to the 6 board members. They were shrinking back into their chairs, desperate to distance themselves from William. If any of you authorize a single transfer to his personal accounts or attempt to liquidate the family trust to bail out his criminal son, I will personally see you indicted for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, I warned them. The men immediately closed their laptops and pushed their chairs away from the table, silently surrendering their loyalty. William lunged forward, swiping his arm across the table and sending crystal water glasses shattering against the far wall. "This is my company," he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "I am the patriarch of this family. I will destroy you for this." I reached over and pressed the red button on the executive intercom. "Send security up to the boardroom immediately," I instructed. Less than a minute later, 2 massive, broad-shouldered security guards entered the room. They looked at William, a man they had taken orders from for years, and then they looked at me. I gave them a sharp, definitive nod. The guards stepped forward and grabbed William by the elbows. He thrashed wildly against their grip, completely losing the last shreds of his aristocratic dignity. He kicked and shouted, his expensive tailored suit wrinkling, as they forcibly restrained him. "Get your hands off me," William roared, his voice echoing loudly down the executive corridor as they dragged him out the double doors. "I will sue you. I will ruin you." DeAndre and I walked calmly behind the guards, following them into the executive elevator to ensure the former CEO was fully escorted off the premises. The ride down was filled with William's continuous desperate threats. When the elevator doors finally chimed open on the ground floor, the guards dragged him out into the sprawling, crowded marble lobby. Dozens of employees stopped in their tracks, staring in absolute shock as their untouchable boss was physically thrown toward the exit. William managed to wrench his arm free from one of the guards for a split second. He spun around to face me, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. He opened his mouth to scream one final devastating curse, but the words died in his throat. William's face suddenly drained of all color, turning a sickly, translucent white. He gasped loudly, a horrible wet sound that cut through the silence of the lobby. He reached up his trembling hand, clutching violently at the left side of his chest. His eyes widened in sheer overwhelming panic as the immense crushing weight of his stress finally caught up with his heart. He staggered backward, his knees buckling beneath him, and collapsed hard onto the cold marble floor. The sterile, blindingly white corridors of the cardiac intensive care unit stood in stark contrast to the dark, rich mahogany of the corporate boardroom we had just conquered. The air smelled of sharp antiseptic and stale coffee, a scent that clung to the anxious families huddled in the plastic chairs lining the walls. DeAndre and I were not there to hold hands or offer false prayers. We were there because William's sudden dramatic collapse in the lobby had temporarily interrupted the final transfer of physical corporate seals. DeAndre, ever the meticulous legal strategist, needed a quiet table to organize the remaining injunctions against Gavin and finalize the immediate freezing of the Vance family trust. We commandeered a small corner table in the surgical waiting area. I was calmly signing my name across the dotted lines, officially executing the total dismantling of the Vance empire, when the frantic, uneven clatter of designer heels echoed down the hallway. Beatrice Vance burst through the swinging double doors, followed closely by a pale, shivering Caroline. They looked completely decimated. The polish and aristocratic arrogance that had shielded them for decades had evaporated in a matter of hours. Beatrice's usually flawless blowout was flattened and chaotic. Her Chanel trench coat was wrinkled, and dark tracks of ruined mascara stained her cheeks. Caroline looked like a ghost, clutching her phone to her chest with a white-knuckled grip, her eyes darting frantically around the room. They spotted me sitting in the corner with DeAndre. Beatrice's tear-streaked face instantly morphed from pure panic into a mask of venomous, desperate entitlement. She did not approach me with the humility of a woman whose world had just burned down. She marched across the linoleum floor, her heels striking the ground like hammers, and slammed a piece of paper directly onto my stack of legal documents. They will not operate without a massive deposit, Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking loudly enough to draw the stares of every nurse and waiting family member in the wing. We are out of network. William let the premium insurance lapse to cover Gavin's margins, and the hospital administration is demanding an $80,000 deposit for the bypass and the ICU bed. Pay it. I did not flinch. I slowly capped my Mont Blanc pen and set it precisely next to my portfolio. I looked down at the crumpled hospital invoice, then up at Beatrice's bloodshot eyes. You are ordering me to pay your husband's medical bills with the money you spent the last hour accusing me of stealing. I asked, my voice completely level and devoid of any warmth. He is dying in there, Beatrice screamed, leaning over the table and pointing a shaking finger at my face. You took our company. You froze our trust. Gavin is sitting in a federal holding cell, and my husband is on life support. You owe us this money. You owe this family. Pay the $80,000 right now, or his blood is on your hands. I picked up the invoice. The paper felt remarkably light in my hands. I stared at the bold red numbers at the bottom of the page, and a very specific memory washed over me. Exactly 5 years ago, my own mother had suffered a severe, terrifying asthma attack. I had rushed her to an out-of-network clinic in the middle of the night. I was thousands of dollars short for the immediate admission fee. I had called Beatrice from the emergency room waiting area, frantic and crying, begging for a short-term advance against my own salary at the firm. I remembered standing under the flickering fluorescent lights, listening to her cold, annoyed sigh through the receiver. She had told me I was being financially irresponsible. She had told me that bailing me out would set a bad precedent for the company. I looked back up at Beatrice. I folded the $80,000 invoice precisely in half. Then I folded it again, creasing the edges with my thumb. I held Beatrice's frantic gaze as I extended my arm and let the paper drop straight into the blue plastic recycling bin beside our table. Try a payment plan, I said. My voice was smooth, icy, and utterly devoid of pity. I hear the interest rates are perfectly manageable if you cut back on your weekly spa days. Caroline gasped loudly, stepping forward to pull her mother back by the shoulders. You are a monster, Melody, Caroline hissed, her voice trembling with hatred. You are actually going to sit there and let him die over money? No, Caroline. I corrected calmly, picking up my pen to sign the next asset transfer document. I am letting him reap the rewards of his own chronic financial mismanagement. There is a fundamental difference. If you want to save him, I suggest you sell that diamond tennis bracelet you are wearing. Beatrice opened her mouth, her face turning a dangerous shade of purple, preparing to unleash another hysterical tirade. Before she could scream, the heavy doors of the surgical ward pushed open. A grim-faced attending physician in green scrubs stepped out into the waiting room, pulling a surgical cap off his head. He scanned the room with tired eyes. Family of William Vance, the doctor called out. Beatrice and Caroline instantly abandoned our table and rushed toward him, their faces tight with renewed terror. I remained seated, but DeAndre and I both paused our paperwork, listening closely to the exchange. The surgery was successful in stabilizing the immediate blockage. The doctor began, his tone serious and strictly clinical. However, we encountered severe, highly unusual complications during the procedure. I need to ask you some extremely urgent questions about his recent medical history. He has high blood pressure, Beatrice stammered, quickly wringing her hands. That is all. He is a healthy, active man. He just works too hard. The doctor shook his head, his expression darkening as he looked directly at Caroline. Mrs. Vance, your father's heart attack was not just stress-induced. We ran a full toxicology screen when his heart rate spiked irregularly on the operating table. Your father had massive lethal levels of illegal unprescribed amphetamines in his system. Caroline froze entirely. The last remaining drops of color drained from her face. These are not over-the-counter focus supplements, the doctor pressed, lowering his voice, though the hard acoustics of the waiting room carried his words directly to where I sat. This is a highly potent, illicit synthetic stimulant. Has he been associating with anyone who might be supplying him with these narcotics? Because whoever gave him these pills is directly responsible for triggering this cardiac arrest. If we do not identify the exact synthetic compound, the post-operative swelling could be fatal. Caroline stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a horrified sob. Her eyes went wide with a sudden devastating realization. She knew, we all knew. Gavin had not just been stealing from the company. Gavin had been quietly supplying their father with the very same illegal black market stimulants he used to fuel his own manic late-night gambling binges. He had been feeding William pills to keep the old man artificially energized, desperate to keep him blindly running the failing firm while Gavin drained the accounts. The Golden Son had not just bankrupted his father, he had actively poisoned him. The Federal Detention Center was a brutal, unforgiving environment, constructed entirely of cinder-block reinforced steel and fluorescent lights that buzzed with a maddening, relentless hum. For a man accustomed to high thread count Egyptian cotton and imported silk, it was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to break the human spirit. It took exactly 36 hours for Gavin Vance to completely shatter. Stripped of his tailored suits, his expensive hair products, and the chemical stimulants that fueled his hollow bravado, he was reduced to a twitching, sweating shell of a man pacing the length of a tiny interrogation room. The heavy metal door clicked and swung open. DeAndre stepped into the harsh light. He looked absolutely immaculate. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie, carrying a slim leather briefcase. The sheer contrast between the two men was staggering. DeAndre projected an aura of absolute control, while Gavin looked like a drowning rat in an oversized orange jumpsuit. Gavin lunged toward the table, his chained wrists clinking loudly against the metal chair. DeAndre, he gasped, his voice raspy and desperate. Thank God. Did Beatrice send you? Did you bring the bail paperwork? Tell me you brought the transfer documents. I cannot spend another night in this place. The food is inedible and the noise never stops. You have to get me out of here right now. DeAndre did not sit down immediately. He placed his briefcase on the metal table, popped the golden latches, and slowly withdrew a manila folder. He looked down at Gavin with an expression of profound, chilling indifference. I am not your attorney, Gavin. DeAndre stated, his deep baritone echoing off the concrete walls. I represent the board of directors for Apex Development, and I represent the majority shareholder Melody. I am here purely as a courtesy messenger for the federal prosecutors, because your court-appointed public defender requested an intermediary you might actually listen to. Gavin recoiled as if he had been physically struck. His eyes darted around the small room, panic seizing his chest. What do you mean? You have to help me. We are family. We were never family. DeAndre corrected smoothly, pulling a chair out and taking a seat. You made sure of that every single time you mocked my background at your father's dinner table. But we are not here to discuss the past. We are here to discuss your rapidly evaporating future. DeAndre opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. The United States Attorney has a flawless case against you, DeAndre explained, his tone strictly clinical. The hard drive you stole from Melody transmitted your entire hidden offshore ledger directly to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They have every routing number, every ghost account, and every forged signature. But that is just the financial fraud. When they raided your motel room, they also found a substantial quantity of illicit synthetic amphetamines. Gavin swallowed hard, a drop of cold sweat rolling down his temple. Those were for personal use. DeAndre leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. Do not lie to me, Gavin. The hospital ran a toxicology screen on your father when his heart stopped in the corporate lobby yesterday. The levels of synthetic stimulants in his blood were lethal. The chemical compound matches the pills found in your motel room perfectly. The feds know you have been illegally sourcing narcotics and feeding them to your father to keep him artificially energized so he could continue running the firm while you drained it. They are preparing to add drug trafficking and reckless endangerment to your indictment. Gavin began to shake violently. He gripped the edges of the metal table, his knuckles turning white. He forced me to get them. Gavin stammered, his voice rising in a panicked whine. William demanded them. He said he could not keep up with the workload without a boost. I was just trying to help him keep the company afloat. The prosecutors do not care about your excuses, DeAndre replied coldly. They care about securing a conviction. You are looking at a minimum of 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. You will be an old, broken man by the time you see the outside of a cell." Gavin buried his face in his chained hands, a pathetic, muffled sob echoing in the small room. "I cannot do 25 years. I will not survive a month in here. Tell them I will do whatever they want." DeAndre slid a single stapled document across the table. It was a proffer agreement. "The federal prosecutors want the head of the snake," DeAndre said, tapping the paper with his index finger. "They want William Vance. They want the man who orchestrated the tax evasion, the man who built the corrupt culture, and the man who authorized the illegal liquidation attempts. If you sign this agreement, you officially agree to turn state's evidence. You will testify in open court against your own father. You will detail his knowledge of the offshore accounts, and you will swear under oath that he coerced you into procuring the illegal amphetamines." Gavin stared at the document, his breath hitching. "Testify against William. He will destroy me." "William is currently lying in an intensive care unit, bankrupt and stripped of his company," DeAndre reminded him. "He has no power left to destroy anyone. If you provide full cooperation and testify against him, the prosecutors are willing to recommend a reduced sentence of 3 to 5 years at a minimum security federal camp. It is a country club with a fence. You serve your time, you keep your head down, and you get out while you are still relatively young." Gavin did not even hesitate. The deeply ingrained loyalty to the Vance dynasty, the unbreakable family bond that Beatrice and William had preached about for decades, instantly evaporated the moment Gavin faced real adversity. He grabbed the cheap ballpoint pen resting on the table. "He is basically half dead anyway," Gavin muttered feverishly, signing his name on the dotted line. "Why should I rot in a concrete box for his mistakes? I was just following his orders. He ruined us. I am not going down for him. Tell the federal agents I will give them absolutely everything they need. I will bury him." DeAndre watched the coward sell out his own blood without a second thought. He collected the signed document, placed it neatly back into the manila folder, and stood up. He did not offer a goodbye. He simply turned and walked out the heavy steel door, leaving Gavin alone in the buzzing fluorescent light. An hour later, I was sitting in my home office when my secure email server chimed. DeAndre had forwarded a highly compressed audio file. "Federal holding facilities monitor and record all non-privileged conversations." Since DeAndre was not acting as Gavin's legal counsel, the audio of their meeting was legally accessible to the prosecution, and by extension the victims of the fraud. I downloaded the file and pressed play. The audio quality was stark and clear. I listened to Gavin frantically throw his father to the wolves. I listened to the absolute absence of hesitation in his voice as he traded his family's patriarch for a lighter prison sentence. It was the sound of a dynasty eating itself alive. I did not keep the file to myself. I attached the audio recording to a direct message, typed a single sentence, and pressed send. At the hospital, the sterile waiting room of the cardiac intensive care unit was suffocatingly quiet. Caroline sat hunched over a plastic cup of bitter black coffee, her eyes red and swollen from hours of weeping. Beatrice was pacing the hallway outside, arguing with the billing department about their rejected credit cards. Caroline's phone vibrated on the small side table. She picked it up and stared at the screen. The message was from me. It read, "You should know exactly who you are fighting for." With trembling fingers, Caroline tapped the audio file. She lifted the phone to her ear. She heard DeAndre's voice laying out the 25-year sentence. She heard the mention of the illegal amphetamines, and then she heard the voice of her beloved brother, the golden child of the Vance family, speaking with chilling clarity. "He is basically half dead anyway. Why should I rot in a concrete box for his mistakes? I am not going down for him. I will bury him." Caroline lowered the phone slowly, her mouth falling open in a silent scream of pure devastation. The delusion she had clung to for her entire life finally shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her father was a corrupt, drug-addicted fraud. Her mother was a callous, shallow narcissist. And her brother, the man they had all sacrificed everything to protect, was a self-serving coward who only cared about his own survival. Caroline was completely, utterly alone. The heavy oak front door of my private residence echoed with a frantic, rhythmic pounding. Outside, a torrential downpour was washing the streets of the city clean, but the storm was nothing compared to the wreckage standing on my front porch. I pulled open the door to find Caroline Vance. The immaculate, untouchable golden child of the Vance dynasty was completely unrecognizable. Her designer trench coat was plastered to her shaking frame. Her hair was a tangled, wet mess, and her eyes were wild with a feral, hollow panic. She did not yell. She did not demand entry. She simply stood there, shivering in the cold, and looked at me with the absolute defeat of a woman who had finally run out of places to hide. I stepped aside, allowing her to cross the threshold into my warm, quiet foyer. She dripped rainwater onto the polished hardwood floors, wrapping her arms around her chest. "DeAndre locked me out." Caroline choked out her voice, barely a raspy whisper. "He filed for divorce this morning. He froze the personal accounts, the joint credit cards, everything. He knows the federal government locked down the Vance Family Trust, so he knew I would have absolutely zero capital to fight him. He hired the most ruthless custody lawyer in the state, Melody. He is taking the children. He is taking the house. I have exactly $42 in my purse." I led her into the massive, pristine kitchen. I did not offer her a towel. I stood behind the expansive marble island and watched her physically crumble under the weight of her new reality. "I need a loan," Caroline begged, gripping the edge of the marble counter to keep her knees from buckling. "Just $50,000. I need to retain a shark of my own to fight DeAndre in family court. You own the company now. You hold the entirety of my father's debt. 50,000 is pocket change to you. I will sign a promissory note. I will give you whatever equity I have left. Please, Melody, I am begging you." My expression did not change. I looked at the woman who had spent years mocking my clothes, my background, and my work ethic. I turned my back to her and walked over to the kitchen sink. I bypassed the imported sparkling water in the glass front refrigerator. I ignored the filtered water dispenser built into the door. I picked up a plain, cheap glass from the cupboard, turned on the faucet, and filled it to the brim with cloudy, lukewarm tap water. I walked back to the island and slid the plain glass across the smooth marble. It stopped right in front of Caroline's shaking hands. She stared at the tap water for a long moment, the ultimate symbol of her new degraded status. Slowly, because she had absolutely no pride left, she picked up the glass and took a long, desperate drink. "Why on earth would I finance your legal defense?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet kitchen like a scalpel. "You spent the last decade making sure I knew I was beneath you. You took credit for my marketing campaigns. You sabotaged my promotions. You sat back and smiled while your father treated me like a disposable servant." Caroline set the glass down, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Because we are family," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We are not family," I corrected her sharply. "We are simply two women standing in a kitchen, and right now one of us holds all the power and the other is finally facing the truth. But before I even consider giving you a single dime, I want something from you, Caroline. I want the delusion completely stripped away." Caroline looked up, her red-rimmed eyes wide with fear. "What do you want?" I leaned forward, resting my palms flat on the marble. "I want you to say it. I want you to look me in the eye and admit exactly what you are. Admit how you got your vice president title. Admit how you maintained your perfect corporate reputation. Say the words out loud." Caroline shook her head, a pathetic, reflexive attempt to hold on to the ghost of her ego. "Melody, please do not do this." "Say it," I commanded, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving register. "Or you can walk back out into the rain and face DeAndre's lawyers with $42 in your pocket." Caroline closed her eyes. Her shoulders shook as a heavy, agonizing sob tore through her chest. The final wall of her Vance arrogance shattered into dust. "I am mediocre." Caroline wept, her voice echoing miserably in the large kitchen. "I was always mediocre. I never earned a single grade, a single promotion, or a single accolade in my entire life. I only succeeded because my last name was Vance. I only got my position because I bullied the junior staff and stole their presentations. I terrorized people who were smarter and harder working than me because I was terrified they would expose me as a fraud. I am a fraud, Melody. I am nothing without the money. I am nothing. The confession hung in the air, heavy and absolute. I looked at her, absorbing the total unconditional surrender of the golden child. I stood up straight and smoothed the front of my blouse. "Thank you for your honesty, Caroline," I said smoothly. "It is refreshing. But the answer is still no. I do not fund my abusers." Caroline's eyes snapped open, a fresh wave of horror washing over her pale face. "You made me say all of that just to deny me." "I did not make you say anything," I replied, walking past her to open the front door, letting the sound of the raging storm flood back into the foyer. "You simply finally told the truth. Now I suggest you leave." Caroline did not argue. She was entirely empty. She walked out of my house, stepping back into the freezing rain, stepping into a world where she was finally powerless. But Caroline Vance was a cornered animal, and cornered animals possess a vicious instinct for survival. If she could not secure the money to fight DeAndre, she needed a different kind of leverage. She needed absolute protection. The very next morning, the federal courthouse was a circus of reporters, legal aides, and armed guards. The preliminary hearing for Gavin Vance was meant to be a straightforward procedural formality. William Vance's elite defense attorneys were present, preparing to mount a massive coordinated defense to protect the patriarch and shift the blame entirely onto rogue employees. They believed they still controlled the narrative. They were wrong. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open, and the lead federal prosecutor stood up to address the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call a surprise witness to the stand." The prosecutor announced, his voice ringing through the cavernous room. "We call Caroline Vance." Gavin, sitting at the defense table in his orange jumpsuit, whipped his head around so fast his neck popped. The defense attorneys scrambled to their feet in sheer panic. Caroline walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. She was not wearing her usual designer couture. She wore a plain black suit. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and her expression was cold, hard, and utterly focused on self-preservation. She did not look at her brother. She walked directly to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. So, the prosecutor approached the podium. "Ms. Vance, can you confirm for the court the nature of the agreement you signed with the United States Attorney's Office this morning?" "I signed a full cooperation and proffer agreement," Caroline stated, her voice projecting clearly into the microphone. "In exchange for total blanket immunity from any prosecution related to the financial crimes at Apex Development, I have agreed to turn over a secondary hidden server containing a decade of internal emails. Furthermore, I am here to testify that my brother Gavin Vance and my father William Vance fully conspired to hide corporate assets, evade federal taxes, and illegally launder money through offshore shell companies. I have the receipts, and I am handing them all over." Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Gavin lunged forward, screaming obscenities at his sister before the federal marshals slammed him back into his chair. The defense attorneys frantically shouted objections that the judge immediately overruled. Caroline sat perfectly still on the witness stand, watching the total spectacular implosion of her own family. She had recognized that the Vance ship was sinking, and rather than go down with it, she had slit the life rafts, tied her father and brother to the anchor, and secured the only remaining life jacket for herself. The sweet revenge was not just taking their empire. It was watching them gladly destroy each other to survive. The very next morning, the federal courthouse witnessed the final spectacular collapse of the Vance dynasty. Caroline Vance took the witness stand at her brother's preliminary hearing. She did not look at Gavin, who strained furiously against his restraints, or at the empty gallery seats where her parents should have been. To secure absolute immunity for her own financial complicity, Caroline methodically handed the prosecution every encrypted hard drive, every back-channel email, and every hidden ledger. She testified with chilling precision that Gavin and William had masterminded the entire offshore laundering operation. In less than 2 hours, Caroline secured her freedom by cementing her brother's 25-year prison sentence and her father's utter ruin. The family had officially eaten itself alive. I watched the live news coverage from the quiet sanctuary of my living room, sipping black coffee. The Vance empire was ashes. I assumed I would finally have a day of absolute silence. I was wrong. The doorbell chimed with a polite sing-song rhythm. I opened the front door and stared in utter disbelief. Beatrice Vance stood on my porch. The pouring rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving a crisp, bright morning, but Beatrice looked completely untethered from reality. She was wearing a pristine pale pink Chanel suit, her hair immaculately styled, her face powdered into a flawless, unnerving mask of serenity. Cradled gently in her arms was a massive preservation-grade garment box, draped in protective plastic. "Melody, darling," Beatrice chirped. Her voice was light, airy, and entirely devoid of the venom she had spat at me in the hospital waiting room just 48 hours prior. "I know it is early, but we have so much planning to do." She pushed past me, gliding into my foyer as if she owned the property, completely ignoring the fact that her husband was lying in a cardiac intensive care unit and her children were currently destroying each other in federal court. I closed the door slowly. "What are you doing in my house, Beatrice?" She unzipped the garment bag with an eerie, manic enthusiasm. The fabric parted to reveal a stunning vintage silk and lace wedding gown. "It is my original Vera Wang," Beatrice announced, smoothing the delicate lace with trembling fingers. "I wore it when William and I renewed our vows in Paris 20 years ago. I was thinking about everything that has happened recently. All this silly stress over the company and the accounts. It is just a rough patch. Every marriage has them. I brought the dress for you. I think you and Gavin should renew your vows. A fresh start. We can host a beautiful garden party at the estate, invite the board members, and show everyone that the Vance family is stronger than ever." I stared at her. The psychological break was absolute. Faced with the total annihilation of her elitist identity, Beatrice's mind had simply rejected reality. She was retreating into a fantasy where she was still the untouchable matriarch and I was just the obedient, grateful daughter-in-law. "Put the dress away, Beatrice," I commanded, my voice sharp and grounded. She blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "It can be altered," she insisted, holding the silk up against her chest. "I know you prefer simpler things, Melody, but as a Vance, you have an image to uphold. Gavin will look so handsome in his tuxedo. We just need to post bail, clear up this little misunderstanding with the IRS, and we can go back to normal." I was thinking white roses for the floral arrangements. "What do you think?" "There is no normal," I said, stepping right into her line of sight, forcing her to look at me. "I am not going to play along with your psychotic delusion." Beatrice's eyes widened, a flash of genuine panic bleeding through her powdered mask. "Melody, do not be difficult. Family sticks together. You just need to support your husband." "You do not have a family anymore," I stated, slicing through her denial with clinical precision. "William's heart is failing, and he is a disgraced bankrupt fraud who will spend his remaining days answering to federal investigators. Caroline just sold Gavin out to the United States Attorney to save her own skin. She handed over every piece of evidence they needed. Gavin is going to a maximum security prison for the next 2 decades. He is never coming home." Beatrice shook her head violently, clutching the vintage silk dress so tightly, her knuckles turned stark white. "No, that is just a misunderstanding. William will fix it. William always fixes it. He will call the governor. He will handle the press. William has nothing." I countered, my voice echoing relentlessly in the quiet foyer. "And you have nothing. Your entire identity, your country club memberships, your charity galas, your summers in the Hamptons, it was all funded by stolen money. You are not a high society matriarch, Beatrice. You are the wife of a criminal and the mother of a felon. The money is gone. The status is dead. The Vance name is a punchline on the morning news." "Stop it!" Beatrice shrieked, dropping the wedding dress onto the hardwood floor. It pooled around her designer heels like a discarded rag. She covered her ears like a terrified child. "You are lying. We are the Vances. We are untouchable. You are just a bitter, jealous little girl trying to ruin us." I stepped closer, invading her space, giving her absolutely no room to retreat into her fantasy. "I did not ruin you. You ruined yourselves with your greed and your bottomless arrogance. You thought you could treat people like garbage because your bank accounts shielded you from the consequences. Look around, Beatrice. The shield is gone. You are standing in my house because you have absolutely nowhere else to go. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. The manic brightness drained from her face, leaving her looking hollowed out, aged, and profoundly empty. Her shoulders slumped. Her knees buckled. Beatrice Vance, the woman who had spent a decade making me feel like dirt beneath her shoes, collapsed onto my foyer floor. She fell right on top of her precious Vera Wang gown, burying her face in her hands, and began to sob. It was not a dignified, polite cry. It was the ugly, guttural wail of a woman mourning the death of her own existence. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her comfort. I simply walked over to the front door and pulled it wide open. "Get out," I instructed coldly. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, leaving the ruined silk dress on the floor. She stumbled out onto the front porch, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, her perfect blowout ruined by her trembling hands. She leaned against the brick pillar, gasping for air, looking completely destroyed. Just as she turned back to look at me, a low, heavy rumbling sound echoed down the street. We both turned to look. 3 massive commercial moving trucks were turning the corner, their air brakes hissing loudly as they crawled down the pavement. They bypassed my driveway completely and headed straight toward the sprawling gated Vance estate at the end of the cul-de-sac. Beatrice gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the trucks. "What are they doing? Where are they going?" "They are going to your house, Beatrice," I replied, stepping out onto the porch and folding my arms. "Because it is not your house anymore. You defaulted on the estate's collateral loans months ago to cover Gavin's legal retainers. I own the deed. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I am officially foreclosing on the property. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate my premises." The sheer scale of the Vance estate made a 1-hour eviction a logistical nightmare, but my asset recovery team was highly efficient. The men stepped out of the commercial trucks wearing matching gray uniforms, carrying heavy-duty packing crates, dollies, and clipboards. Beatrice stood frozen on the wet pavement, the rain continuing to drizzle around her as my lead agent handed her a legally binding, federally mandated foreclosure notice. "You cannot do this," Beatrice whispered, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. "This house has been in William's family for 4 generations. You cannot just take it." I stepped off the porch holding a digital tablet. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. "Your husband leveraged this property to secure a high-risk commercial loan," I stated, tapping the screen to bring up the property deed. "He defaulted on that loan. My holding company purchased the debt. The transfer of ownership was finalized this morning at 8 o'clock. You are currently trespassing on corporate property, Beatrice. The men walking into the house are here to ensure you only remove personal effects. All furniture, artwork, and fixtures are now legally the property of my firm." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed silently. The utter lack of emotion in my voice was doing far more damage than any screaming match ever could. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to act like a vindictive, scorned daughter-in-law so she could play the victim. Instead, she was facing a stone-cold corporate entity who viewed her entire existence as a mere line item on a balance sheet. Because her personal accounts were entirely frozen by the federal government, Beatrice could not afford her usual luxury moving service. She had been forced to beg a distant relative for a credit card just to secure transportation. Watching the former queen of the country club slowly walk toward a dented bright orange and white rented U-Haul truck parked at the end of the driveway was the ultimate visual representation of her downfall. The next 45 minutes were a masterclass in humiliation. Beatrice had no staff left. Her maids, her personal chef, and her butler had all abandoned the property the moment their paychecks bounced. She was entirely alone. The woman who had never lifted anything heavier than a crystal champagne flute was now dragging black plastic trash bags filled with designer clothing across the wet, muddy lawn. Her expensive high heels sank deep into the saturated grass, ruining the leather. I stood under the shelter of a large black umbrella held by one of my security personnel. I watched her struggle, making precise notations on my tablet as my recovery agents logged the assets remaining inside the house. Beatrice dragged a heavy box filled with her vanity perfumes and jewelry boxes toward the ramp of the U-Haul. Her foot slipped on the wet metal. The box tumbled from her grip, crashing onto the driveway. Expensive glass shattered. Bottles of imported French perfume cracked open, sending a cloying, overwhelming floral scent wafting through the damp air. She dropped to her knees right in the middle of the driveway. She did not bother to pick up the broken glass. She looked up at me, her face completely raw, her chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. "Are you happy now?" Beatrice screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. "You have taken my husband. You have taken my children. You are forcing me to load a moving truck in the rain like a common laborer. Look at me. Look at what you have done to me. Are you finally satisfied, Melody? Is this enough for you?" I looked down at her. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply swiped a finger across my tablet screen. "Please ensure you sweep up the broken glass before you depart." I instructed, my voice entirely flat. "I do not want the tires of the new landscaping vehicles to be punctured. This property requires extensive maintenance before we list it on the commercial market." Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless sound. The sheer, businesslike indifference of my response broke whatever tiny fragment of fight she had left. She realized with crushing certainty that I did not care enough about her to even hate her anymore. To me, she was nothing but a minor administrative hurdle. She slowly pushed herself off the wet concrete. She grabbed a broom from the back of the rental truck and silently began sweeping her shattered perfumes into a pile. While she swept, a white van pulled up to the front curb. Two locksmiths stepped out carrying heavy power drills and bags of heavy-duty brass hardware. They walked directly to the massive mahogany front doors of the estate. The piercing, high-pitched whine of the power drills echoed loudly through the upscale neighborhood. Across the street, I could see the curtains twitching in the windows of the neighboring mansions. The wealthiest families in the city were watching the Vance matriarch being physically locked out of her own castle. The social execution was absolute. "I need your keys," I said, holding out my hand, as Beatrice closed the back door of the U-Haul. She reached into her Chanel pocketbook and pulled out the heavy brass keyring. She dropped it into my palm without a single word. She looked aged, hollowed out, and entirely defeated. She turned and slowly climbed up into the driver's seat of the massive commercial truck. She looked ridiculously small behind the oversized steering wheel. The locksmiths finished their work. The heavy front doors clicked shut, securing the property. I turned to walk back toward my own vehicle. Suddenly, the screech of burning rubber sliced through the quiet, rainy morning. A beaten-up, rusted sedan tore around the corner of the cul-de-sac, ignoring the stop sign entirely. It hopped the curb, tearing deep trenches into the manicured grass of the Vance estate, and slammed to a halt just inches from the front bumper of the U-Haul truck. The driver's side door kicked open. Gavin Vance stumbled out onto the lawn. He was not wearing a tailored suit. He was wearing an ill-fitting gray sweatsuit. His hair was completely wild, and his eyes were wide, manic, and bloodshot. As he took a step forward, the heavy black plastic casing of a federal ankle monitor bulged visibly beneath the hem of his sweatpants. He was out on bail after signing the plea agreement that condemned his father, but his release came with strict, non-negotiable house arrest conditions. He had clearly violated his parole to come here. Gavin ignored his mother sitting in the cab of the moving truck. He locked his crazed, desperate eyes entirely on me. "Melody." Gavin roared, charging across the wet grass with his fists clenched, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. My security detail immediately stepped forward, their hands moving to their tactical belts, but I raised a single index finger. "Stand down," I ordered. I took 2 steps backward, retreating into the cavernous, empty foyer of the Vance estate. "Let him in." Gavin crossed the threshold like a rabid dog, his chest heaving, his wet sneakers squeaking against the pristine hardwood. The locksmiths pulled the heavy mahogany doors shut behind him, the thick brass deadbolts clicking into place with a terrifying finality. We were sealed inside the vacant mansion. With the tapestries, rugs, and antique furniture gone, the house was a hollow, echoing tomb. Gavin lunged, backing me toward the sweeping, grand staircase. He slammed his fist into the drywall just inches from my face, the impact booming through the empty halls. "You think you won?" he screamed, his voice cracking with unhinged desperation. "You are nothing, Melody. You are a parasite. You were a middle management nobody before I plucked you out of the mud and gave you my name. I made you. I gave you the clothes on your back. You are a Vance because I allowed it. Without me, you are a pathetic, invisible gold digger." I did not flinch. I did not shrink away. I looked at the sweat dripping from his chin, smelling the stale, sour reek of cheap coffee and pure fear radiating off him. He was trying to use his physical size to cow me, a desperate tactic from a man who had exhausted every other resource. I simply slid sideways, stepping out from the shadow of his arm, and walked toward the built-in marble credenza where my leather briefcase rested. "You gave me a name," I said, my voice perfectly level, slicing through the ringing echo of his temper tantrum, "and I gave you an illusion to live in." I popped the golden latches of my briefcase. I reached inside and extracted a massive 4-inch thick black leather binder. It must have weighed 10 pounds. I lifted it high and slammed it down onto the marble counter. The heavy thud resonated through the empty house like a gavel strike. "This," I stated, tapping the thick leather cover, "is your actual legacy, Gavin." Gavin blinked, his manic energy faltering as he stared at the binder. I flipped open the heavy cover. The pages were meticulously organized with color-coded tabs. "Tab 1," I said, flipping a chunk of pages. "The Dubai commercial tech merger in 2019. You spearheaded that negotiation. You told your father it was a stroke of genius. You actually lost $5 million in 3 days because you failed to read the currency fluctuation clauses. I caught it. I stayed up for 48 hours straight, forged the recovery documents, and moved capital from a ghost account to balance the ledger before William saw it." I flipped to the next tab, not letting him speak. "Tab 2, the Portland real estate acquisition in 2021. You signed off on land that was zoned entirely for industrial waste. A $20 million mistake. I spent 6 months bribing city council members and burying the zoning reports to flip the designation to commercial residential. I drafted every single email you sent to the board. I fed you the talking points through an earpiece while you sat in those meetings sweating through your custom suits." Gavin's jaw slacked. The color began to drain from his face. "Tab 4. I continued, relentlessly, turning to a section filled with highlighted bank statements. "Your offshore gambling debts, expertly masked as consulting fees to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I cooked those books. I scrubbed your illegal synthetic amphetamine purchases from the corporate expense accounts. I rewrote your disastrous illiterate project proposals while you slept off your hangovers in luxury hotel suites." I slammed the binder shut. The sound made him flinch physically. "You were never the alpha, Gavin," I told him. My tone stripped of any anger, projecting only absolute clinical indifference. "You were never the brilliant executive. You were a liability, a walking, talking catastrophe. I propped you up. I let you wear the bespoke suits. I let you shout at the junior partners and play the conquering king because a puppet who thinks he is a god is the easiest thing in the world to control. You did not make me, Gavin. I manufactured you." Gavin stared at the thick black binder. His eyes darted to the pages I had left exposed, his own signatures sitting right next to my corrected, flawless ledgers. The indisputable mathematical proof of his own overwhelming incompetence. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He was not a victim of a grand conspiracy. He was not a fallen titan of industry. He was just a fool, a mediocre, heavily medicated fool who had been managed by his wife for nearly a decade. The absolute destruction of his ego was instantaneous. The manic, terrifying energy completely evaporated from his frame. Gavin stumbled backward, his legs giving out. He hit the base of the sweeping staircase and slid down the polished wood, collapsing onto the bare floor. He brought his hands up to his face, staring at his palms as if he no longer recognized his own skin. He did not scream. He did not argue. He just sat there, a broken, hollowed-out shell, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. Then the sound started. Faint at first, but rapidly growing louder. The high-pitched, oscillating wail of federal sirens cut through the rainy morning, converging on the cul-de-sac from multiple directions. Gavin's head snapped up, his bloodshot eyes widening in fresh, absolute terror. He looked down at the heavy black plastic of the federal ankle monitor strapped to his leg. "My monitor!" He stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "It takes them hours to respond to a perimeter breach." "How are they here?" I picked up my smartphone from the marble counter. The screen was brilliantly illuminated, displaying a secure emergency dispatch application. I looked down at the man who had once believed he owned me. "I let you violate your parole so I could personally watch them take you away." The air conditioning in the Honorable Judge Marcus Thorne's federal courtroom blasted a steady, sterile chill, perfectly matching the absolute zero temperature of the Vance family's remaining empire. I sat in the very last row of the gallery, observing the final demolition from the best seat in the house. My posture was perfectly straight. I wore a tailored charcoal gray designer suit, a subtle nod to the armor DeAndre had worn when he delivered Gavin's initial plea deal. I was the architect of this ruin, and I was here to inspect my handiwork. The family's legal and personal dismantling had been a coordinated multi-front slaughter throughout the week. Just 48 hours prior, across the plaza in Family Court, Caroline's fate had been permanently sealed. Without the Vance war chest to fund a protracted legal defense, her appointed counsel had been completely outmatched by DeAndre's high-powered legal team. The family court judge had shown zero leniency, reading a blistering 30-page decision into the record. He cited Caroline's sudden lack of independent income, her highly documented history of workplace harassment, and her family's pending federal indictments as clear indicators of a toxic, unstable environment. The ruling was swift and brutal. DeAndre was awarded sole legal and physical custody of their children. Caroline was granted supervised weekend visitations and saddled with a mountain of legal fees she had absolutely no means to pay. She sat 2 rows ahead of me now, a hollow, trembling silhouette of the woman who used to terrorize junior executives. She clutched a crumpled tissue, staring blankly at the floor, utterly defeated. The federal proceedings moved with ruthless bureaucratic efficiency. The court clerk called the docket, and the United States versus Vance commenced. William Vance was not physically present in the courtroom. He appeared via a secure video link from his hospital bed, his skin an ashen gray against the stark white pillows, an oxygen tube resting beneath his nose. The assistant United States attorney stood at the podium and rattled off the charges in a rapid-fire sequence of devastating legal jargon. The prosecution cited blatant violations of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1343 regarding wire fraud and Title 18 Section 1956 for money laundering. They outlined the systemic falsification of corporate financial records, a direct violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, detailing exactly how William had siphoned operational funds into private offshore trusts. Judge Thorne did not hesitate to drop the hammer. William was slapped with $30 million in federal restitution fines, effectively seizing and liquidating whatever hidden capital the patriarch had left in his name. Furthermore, a sweeping injunction was issued by the Securities and Exchange Commission, permanently barring William Vance from ever acting as an officer, director, or consultant for any publicly traded or private corporation. The once mighty king of Apex Development was legally and financially euthanized on a flat-screen monitor, reduced to a bankrupt, bedridden cautionary tale. Then it was Gavin's turn to face the music. He was led from the holding area to the defense table in handcuffs and heavy waist chains, the direct, humiliating result of his spectacularly foolish parole violation at the estate. He looked completely broken. The bespoke suits and imported hair products were gone, replaced by standard-issue prison garments and a pale, unshaven face. The defiance had been entirely bled out of him. His defense attorney attempted a meager, desperate plea for leniency, citing Gavin's cooperation against his own father as a sign of remorse. The prosecution countered immediately, tearing the defense apart with surgical precision. They brought up the aggressive parole violation, the forged signatures on the offshore ledger, and the undeniable wire fraud used to mask the purchase of illicit narcotics. The prosecutor painted Gavin not as a misguided son following orders, but as a greedy, incompetent co-conspirator who had actively accelerated the destruction of his own company for personal gain, funding a chemical dependency with stolen corporate capital. Judge Thorne adjusted his glasses, looking down from the bench with profound disgust. Gavin Alexander Vance, the judge, intoned his deep voice booming through the courtroom sound system. Your actions demonstrate a staggering level of entitlement and a complete disregard for the laws that govern this country. You attempted to build your lifestyle on the backs of defrauded investors and illegal offshore accounts. On the counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, interstate forgery, and the subsequent flagrant violation of your pretrial release conditions, you are remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The courtroom held its collective breath. I sentence you to a term of 60 months, Judge Thorne declared. 5 years in federal prison. There will be no possibility of early parole. The gavel cracked against the sounding block like a gunshot. The sharp wooden sound echoed off the paneled walls, finalizing the absolute destruction of the Vance dynasty. Beatrice Vance, sitting in the front row, let out a muffled, agonizing wail, burying her face in her hands. Caroline did not even flinch, too consumed by her own ruin to mourn her brothers. 2 federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing Gavin by the biceps to haul him away toward the heavy steel doors of the holding cells. As they turned him around, his dead, bloodshot eyes scanned the gallery. He looked past his weeping mother. He looked past his ruined sister. His gaze tracked upward and locked directly onto mine in the back row. He knew I held the deed to the family estate. He knew I had the black binder documenting every single one of his catastrophic failures. But he did not yet understand the absolute totality of my takeover. The remaining corporate assets of Apex Development, the liquidated shell companies, the commercial properties his father had bled dry, and the intellectual property of the firm itself were all currently being auctioned off by the federal government to recover the stolen capital. I had spent the morning routing the necessary capital through my private holding company to acquire every single piece of their former kingdom for pennies on the dollar. I held his stare across the crowded, bustling courtroom. I did not smile. I did not blink. I simply leaned forward slightly, making sure he could see my face clearly, and mouthed 4 silent words: I am the buyer. 365 days later, the world had corrected its axis. The universe possesses a remarkable mechanism for balancing ledgers, and the Vance family was finally paying their outstanding debts in full. The harsh, flickering fluorescent lights of a discount megastore buzzed with a relentless, migraine-inducing hum. Beatrice stood by the automatic sliding glass doors. She wore a bright, oversized blue polyester vest over a faded generic cotton blouse. Her once meticulously manicured hands, previously adorned with diamonds that cost more than a starter home, were now bare, dry, and cracked from harsh commercial soap. She held a stack of weekly promotional flyers. Her orthopedic shoes provided little relief for her screaming lower back. A woman pushing a cart overloaded with cheap plastic toys brushed past her, aggressively knocking the flyers from her grip. The papers scattered across the scuffed linoleum floor. Beatrice slowly bent down to pick them up, her knees popping loudly. The former queen of the country club, the woman who once dictated the social calendar of the city's elite and fired maids for using the wrong brand of imported silver polish, was now entirely invisible. She was a nameless minimum-wage greeter, spending her twilight years absorbing the casual rudeness of strangers. Across the city, in a decaying neighborhood, the Vance family used to actively avoid. Caroline jolted awake. The deafening metallic rattle of the elevated train shook the thin drywall of her 400-square-foot studio apartment. She threw off a scratchy synthetic blanket and stared at the spreading water stains on the popcorn ceiling. The air smelled permanently of stale cooking oil and damp mildew. She had exactly 45 minutes to catch the crosstown bus in the pouring rain. She pulled on an ill-fitting beige uniform polo shirt. There were no more corner offices. There were no more terrified assistants to scream at. Today she faced a grueling 10-hour shift at a high-volume debt collection call center. She checked her bank account balance on her cracked smartphone screen. $14.20. The crushing reality of her court-mandated legal fees and the absolute destruction of her professional reputation ensured she would be living exactly like this, trapped in a cycle of poverty and exhaustion for the rest of her natural life. Far beyond the city limits, the unforgiving morning light filtered through the thick iron bars of a federal penitentiary cell. Gavin sat on the edge of a thin, rigid cot bolted to a cinderblock wall. He wore a shapeless, faded khaki uniform. The loud mechanical clang of the cell block doors unlocking signaled the start of another strictly regimented day. He stared at the scuffed concrete floor between his canvas slip-on shoes. The designer suits were gone. The expensive narcotics were gone. The sycophants who laughed at his terrible jokes were gone. He was no longer a Vance. He was inmate number 84729. He had 4 years left of mopping cafeteria floors, eating processed food from a plastic tray, and living in a state of constant low-level fear. The manic energy that once fueled his delusions of grandeur had been entirely hollowed out, leaving behind a broken, empty vessel of a man. The contrast was absolute. I stood in the center of the newly christened Apex Plaza, the sun reflecting off the towering 80-story glass facade of the city's newest commercial crown jewel. The morning air was crisp, clean, and full of limitless promise. A massive crowd of industry leaders, city officials, and financial press gathered around the polished marble steps. I wore a tailored, striking crimson designer suit that commanded the space without demanding it. I stepped up to the crystal podium, the rapid flash of cameras capturing my every move. To my immediate right stood DeAndre. He looked impeccable in a custom navy suit projecting an aura of absolute authority and unshakable loyalty. When I restructured the ruins of the Vance empire, liquidating their toxic assets and rebranding the conglomerate into Apex Holdings, LLC, my very first executive action was naming him Chief Legal Counsel. He had orchestrated the legal annihilation of my enemies flawlessly in the courtroom, securing his own future while securing mine. We operated as a seamless, unstoppable partnership. I leaned into the microphone, looking out over the sea of faces. Today is not just the opening of a building, I announced, my voice carrying clear and strong across the plaza, echoing off the surrounding skyscrapers. It is the dawn of a new era of accountability, innovation, and uncompromising vision. We stand on the foundation of a company that has been entirely rebuilt from the ground up, stripped of its liabilities, and focused singularly on the future. I stepped back from the podium as a silver tray was presented to me. I lifted a pair of oversized gilded scissors. The thick red ribbon stretched across the main entrance caught the brilliant sunlight. I looked out at the glittering city skyline. I remembered the mud, the humiliation, the relentless gaslighting, and the years of quiet, meticulous planning in the shadows. They had called me a parasite. They had called me a nobody. They had vastly underestimated the intelligence and the ruthless patience of the woman they brought into their home. I had not simply survived the betrayal of the Vance family, I had systematically dismantled their kingdom, purchased the board, and entirely rewrote the rules of the game. I closed the scissors. The red ribbon fell to the marble steps. The crowd erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. I smiled, feeling the profound, warming glow of total, undeniable victory. The story of Melody's ultimate triumph serves as a powerful reminder that true success is never handed to you. It is meticulously constructed in the shadows. While the Vance family relied on arrogance, entitlement, and a false sense of superiority, Melody utilized patience, sharp intellect, and undeniable competence to dismantle their empire. The fundamental lesson is that underestimating someone based on their background or quiet demeanor is a fatal mistake. Authentic power belongs to those who build their own solid foundations, rather than blindly exploiting others. Have you ever had to quietly prove your doubters wrong? Share your story in the comments below.